Hey guys, tonight we're going back to a time when the air was thick with coal smoke, the streets were packed with people, and the idea of indoor plumbing was basically science fiction. We're dropping straight into Victorian Manchester, around the year 1842, a city growing so fast it can barely keep up with its own population, let alone its sewage. It's loud, it's grimy, and yeah, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and what time it is for you right now down in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive just as the sun begins to rise, though the light struggles to reach the streets. The air has weight to it, thick with soot, damp from the River Irwell, and scented with equal parts coal, horse manure and yesterday's waste. You step off the cobbled main road and onto a narrow path, crushed between two towering brick buildings, already blackened by factory smoke. A low haze floats just above the rooftops, catching the morning sun in a sickly orange glow. You're here now, in the heart of industrial England's fastest growing city. Welcome to Manchester. The street is alive, not in a warm or romantic way, but in the way of something overripe. People stir in doorways, children cry somewhere close by, and someone is already shouting about bread. You notice that the buildings, though tall, are crumbling in places. The wood of doors and window frames is swollen from the ever-present damp, and bricks are loose under your feet. The year is 1842, and Manchester is a contradiction in motion. At its heart, it's the engine room of the British Empire. Factories here produce more cotton goods than anywhere else on earth. But for every booming mill and new train line, there's a tenement stuffed with coughing children and rain-soaked bedding. You're walking the fine line between glory and grime. Within moments, your boots are splashed. The gutters run with something brownish, and you don't want to guess what. Most homes here share one outdoor privy between dozens of tenants, and waste collection is more of a theory than a service. As you glance down an alley, a rat, bold, plump and disturbingly calm, strolls across your path like it pays rent. The city grew too fast. That's the official excuse. In just a few decades, Manchester went from a market town to a roaring industrial hub, attracting tens of thousands of workers from across Britain and Ireland. There was no time to plan, no zoning, and no mercy for the poor. Housing popped up wherever land was cheap, which usually meant flood-prone lowlands and areas boxed in by canals and smoke-belching factories. You're just a few blocks from Deansgate, one of the city's main arteries, but already the terrain shifts. The buildings close in. The light dims further. You're in a court, one of the slum configurations designed less like a neighbourhood and more like a trap. These are enclosed spaces surrounded by houses on all sides, accessible by one narrow passage barely wide enough for a cart. Once you're in, you're sealed off from sight, sound and often help. A man pushes past you, muttering something under his breath in a thick Lancastrian accent. His boots are cracked, his coat patched. A young girl with straw-coloured hair holds onto his coattails, barefoot despite the October chill. She stares at you briefly, her face pale, lips bluish, before they disappear down a set of steps leading to a basement room. You didn't realise until now that people actually live down there. Basement dwellings, or cellars, were some of the worst accommodations Manchester had to offer, and they were common. Damp year-round, with poor ventilation and no sunlight, these homes bred disease and despair in equal measure. The mortality rate in Manchester's working-class districts hovered dangerously close to the level of an active war zone. In some neighbourhoods, more than 50% of children died before the age of 5. Let that sit for a second. You hear a sudden cough, deep and rattling, from an upper window. The woman leans out and spits into the gutter, barely missing a scurrying dog below. Phlegm, unfortunately, is just part of the soundtrack here. Tuberculosis is rampant. So is typhus. Cholera? Oh, absolutely. It's the disease buffet. And with no organised sanitation and shared water pumps located suspiciously close to cesspits, outbreaks are just part of the rhythm of life. Despite all this, people live here. They work. They laugh sometimes. They even fall in love somehow. In the middle of this constant pressure cooker, there's an incredible grit. You'll come to notice that Manchester's poorest citizens aren't passive victims of their conditions. They adapt, resist, and find community where they can. Still, it's hard to romanticise, especially when a wagon clatters by loaded with coal and a body. Yeah, that's not a metaphor. The man at the front has a black cloth draped over his face, and the load beneath the tarp isn't moving. Death in Victorian slums wasn't just common, it was visible, constant, and often anonymous. Many couldn't afford burials. Paupers' graves filled with unnamed souls were the norm, not the exception. Now for the quirky fact of the day. Manchester once had an unofficial dog tax man, a local eccentric who roamed the streets collecting imaginary taxes from pet owners, complete with homemade receipts. No one knows if he believed in his job or was just in it for scraps and shillings, but he was a fixture of local folklore for years. And here's a debate that still keeps historians scratching their heads. How much did the Industrial Revolution actually improve the lives of ordinary people? Sure, wages rose slightly. But what's a few extra pence when you're breathing soot, raising 6 kids in one room, and fighting cholera every summer? Some scholars argue that rural life, for all its hardships, offered more stability and cleaner air. Others claim the city gave working-class families access to food, services, and even rudimentary education they never had before. No one fully agrees, and maybe no one ever will. You stand there for a long moment, watching as a baker's boy rushes past swinging a half-empty basket. The sounds of a mill starting up begin to rise in the distance, an industrial hum that builds into a full-throated mechanical roar, and behind it all the city breathes, a deep, ragged breath, like a giant who hasn't slept in years. This is where you'll be staying for a while. Don't worry, you'll get used to the smell. You take your first real steps into the slum proper, leaving behind even the faint order of the main street. The moment you pass under the low archway into one of the courts, the world seems to change. The air grows heavier, staler. Sounds become more immediate, like they're echoing off the close-set walls of a deep canyon. You've entered a place where the sun barely reaches and the city barely remembers. The ground beneath your feet is a mess of slick cobblestones, unevenly laid decades ago and long since warped by weather, waste, and use. It's early, but the place is already wide awake. A woman is yelling at her children from a doorway, half in fury, half in fatigue. Her voice bounces off the bricks and through you like a thrown stone. Laundry lines stretch overhead, weighed down by shirts and underclothes still dripping from last night's wash. You're hit with the sharp, sour scent of lye mixed with something far less specific, something the polite folks would call effluence. On either side, the buildings lean in, not dramatically, but enough to notice. These were thrown up in a hurry during the early waves of the industrial boom. 2-room cottages, back-to-back houses, crammed together with barely an alley between. Some are already crumbling, roofs patchy with slate, chimneys askew. The cracks along the walls don't just look unsafe, they are unsafe. Collapses happened. Not frequently, but not rarely either. A child darts past you without warning, barefoot with a slice of bread clenched in one grubby hand. Her clothes are basically rags. Her feet slap the cobbles as she disappears around a corner laughing. Another kid follows, then another. You realise with a start that there are more children here than adults. Kids on steps, in windows, tucked into doorways. Some look like they're playing, others just sit still and stare. The noise is incredible. It's not the roar of the factories, though you can still hear that in the distance, but the clatter of many lives packed tightly into a space that can barely contain them. Voices argue, laugh, shout. Metal clinks. Somewhere, someone is playing a fiddle wildly out of tune. Above it all, the slow, wet slap of a woman scrubbing something against a washboard. It's chaotic, but not hostile, just loud. You pass a narrow alley branching off from the court, barely wide enough for one person. It smells worse in there, and you hear the slow dribble of something leaking. Maybe from a privy, maybe from a rain barrel, maybe from somewhere much worse. You wisely choose not to investigate. Near a small pile of broken crates, you find an older man sitting on a stool that looks like it's held together with prayer and hope. He's smoking a clay pipe and staring into space like it owes him money. His face is a roadmap of creases, his hands too large for his arms, scarred and blistered from years in the mills or the brickyards or both. He nods at you but doesn't speak. He doesn't have to. His face tells the whole story. You get the distinct impression that nobody here is really alone, even if they're by themselves. The slum is a web. Families, neighbours, landlords, debt collectors, street vendors, and the occasional rat, all tangled together in a tight mesh of survival. You pass a window propped open with a spoon, and see a mother rocking a baby with one foot while kneading dough with both hands. Next door, someone has strung a broken umbrella over their window to block the rain that never seems to stop. Victorian Manchester didn't build these slums, it became them. The flood of workers into the city meant every available space was taken and then subdivided. One house meant for a family of 4 now holds 20 people. Cellars become bedrooms, sheds become kitchens, attics, if you're lucky, are slightly less damp. There's a weird kind of rhythm to it. People know when to step aside for someone else's bucket. They know whose baby cries in the night and who's likely to share their soup if you ask right. It's not romantic, it's necessity. And necessity makes strange neighbours. You catch a glimpse of one of those neighbours now. A man hauling a makeshift cart filled with bones, rags, and what you hope are discarded animal parts. He's one of the city's many scavengers, earning a few pence a day collecting and selling scraps to dealers who'll turn them into glue, paper or soap. His cart squeaks and rattles as he pulls it past a group of children who stop to watch, with the solemn fascination only kids can manage. Above you a sign swings crookedly from a rusted bracket. Smith's Yard, no loitering. You laugh, just a little. There's nowhere to loiter. You're either moving, working, or sleeping. Even resting is a kind of motion here. You begin to notice how people lean into each other. Literally. The walls, the door frames, each other's backs. Anything to rest without fully stopping. Now comes a curious moment. As you pass a doorway half covered with a blanket, you hear singing. A woman's voice, soft and breathy, singing a lullaby in Irish. It's almost too quiet to catch, but it stops you in your tracks. For all the grime and chaos around you, it's suddenly the most human sound you've heard all morning. This was one of the overlooked truths of the time. Manchester was a city of immigrants. The Irish came in waves, escaping famine and poverty back home. With them came their songs, their language, and their endless tension with the locals who blamed them for driving wages down and crime up. Scholars still argue how much of that blame was rooted in truth and how much in fear and prejudice. But walk this alley, and you can see the mingling. English, Irish, Welsh, even a few Jewish families from Eastern Europe. It's not peaceful, but it's coexistence, barely. The quirky fact you pick up today? Manchester's slums had their own secret slang, words like chuck for friend or skrike for crying. There were entire phrases used only within certain courts, a whole urban dialect born of necessity and noise. And here's your scholarly rabbit hole for the night. Historians still debate whether these early slum dwellers saw themselves as working class in the way we think of it today. Some argue the idea of a shared identity among labourers didn't fully emerge until later in the 19th century. Others say it was already here, in the shared struggle, the mutual dependence, the recognition that life outside the slum was for someone else entirely. You've now walked the court from one end to the other. It's maybe 40 yards long, but it feels like a small country. You duck back under the archway, blinking against the suddenly brighter light of the main street. It's only been 20 minutes, maybe 30, but already it feels like you've lived a whole morning in someone else's life. And you're just getting started. You're still shaking off the grime of the court when you meet them, your new neighbours, or at least the people you'll be packed beside for the foreseeable future. You didn't exactly rent a flat. You more or less claimed a space with your boots and a nod. That's how it works here, and if you're lucky, no one else needs it more than you do. The building you're staying in is technically a house, but the word feels generous. 3 floors, each divided into a front room and a back room. 6 families, 1 privy, no kitchen. Welcome to the timeless art of cramming life into corners. You duck through a warped wooden doorway into the front room on the first floor. It's small, maybe 10 feet across, with a low ceiling browned by candle smoke and moisture. The air is thick, warm, and heavy with the scent of onions, old wool and people. Lots of people. You count 6 at first glance. A mother stirs something over a small fire, a toddler toddles, and an older girl, maybe 10, braids her sister's hair with surprising gentleness. You're not a guest, you're just here. So you stand quietly, adjusting to the flickering light and trying not to trip over a tin basin on the floor. The fire, such as it is, glows behind a bent grate stuffed with half-burned coal and wet sticks. The pot above it bubbles weakly, sending up a smell that's more watery hope than stew. The father is out working the night shift at a nearby factory. He won't be back until morning. That means the mother, Agnes, you'll learn, is running the whole household on her own tonight. She doesn't greet you with words, but with a glance that says, "Keep your boots clean and your voice down." You oblige. There's a sense of order here, surprisingly. The room is impossibly full, but arranged with purpose. A mattress is rolled up in the corner. Blankets are folded neatly, patched but clean. The children's clothes, while clearly worn down to their final threads, are mended with care. This is survival with structure, and you get the sense that Agnes would rather walk barefoot over nails than be called slovenly. You learn that the 6 of them, Agnes, her husband Robert, and their 4 children, live entirely within these 4 walls. The parents sleep on a straw mattress in one corner, the children in the other. During the day, everything folds, stacks, or disappears. Meals are cooked low to the floor. Baths are rare, taken in the same tin basin now warming by the fire and shared, oldest to youngest. Cold, of course. You're standing where dinner happens, where arguments break out, where lullabies are sung, where lives are lived and lost. There is no hallway, no privacy. Every cough, every sob, every whispered word is public. Still, there's dignity. Agnes offers you a piece of bread, thin, slightly stale, but offered with sincerity. You take it, nod your thanks, and chew slowly. The oldest daughter, Mary, watches you with quiet interest. She seems older than her years, and you'd be right. At 12, she works part-time in a hat factory, already considered a reliable wage earner. Her fingers are quick, stained with dye, and she doesn't speak unless spoken to. That's one of the many unwritten rules here. Children are to be helpful, invisible when necessary, and never idle. You'll see more of this as the days go on, but it becomes clear right away. The line between childhood and adulthood is paper thin in the slums. Mary's already on the adult side. Her younger sister Nellie won't be far behind. A thump sounds above. Someone stomping. Probably the lodger upstairs, a man who works at the same mill as Robert. He comes home drunk more often than not, but he pays a penny a night for floor space, which keeps the landlord off everyone's backs. The walls here are paper thin. Every movement, every muttered curse, every slosh of chamber pot gets shared, whether you like it or not. And let's talk about that pot. It's in the corner, behind a stained sheet strung up as a sort of modesty curtain. During the night, nobody braves the outside privy unless they absolutely have to, not with rats and strangers lurking in the dark. So the chamber pot fills. In the morning, someone, often Mary, empties it into the gutter or the nearest cesspool. That's daily life. Waste disposal by hand. The family's rent is 5 shillings a week, which is extortionate for a space this size. But with demands so high and laws so lax, landlords can charge what they like. They rarely see their tenants. Collections are made by men with sour faces and big fists, knocking on doors and threatening eviction for a shilling missed. Some tenants take in even more lodgers to make ends meet, splitting already cramped rooms with strangers just to scrape together the fee. Here's the strange fringe fact of the night. In some of these tenements, especially in the worst ones, landlords actually rented sleeping shifts. You didn't rent a room, you rented a spot for a few hours. Day shift workers slept during the night shift's work hours and vice versa. A literal warm body economy. You paid to lie down in someone else's warmth. You notice a family portrait drawn in charcoal on the wall. Just stick figures, but clearly done by one of the children. Someone's tried to rub it out, maybe ashamed of the scrawls, but it's still there. A tiny act of claiming space, a whisper. We live here too. The debate historians can't quite settle, whether families like this one had more stability in slum housing than in the rural shacks they left behind. Urban poverty was brutal, but predictable. You could sometimes find work, scrape together rent, band together. Rural life was slower, but less forgiving in its own way. A bad harvest could mean total ruin. Cities offered a cruel kind of consistency. Back in the room, Nellie lets out a laugh. It's small but bright, and for a moment the entire place feels softer. Agnes doesn't smile, but her voice gentles as she tells her daughter to finish her bread and leave you alone. The youngest boy, Sam, is asleep already, curled up against the wall, a thumb in his mouth and a sock over his hand for warmth. You sit on a crate in the corner, the fire throwing flickers of gold across the soot-stained ceiling. This is where the night settles, not in silence, but in a gradual quieting. The voices lower, the shadows lengthen, the breathing deepens. For now, this is home. Cramped, loud, exhausting, but shared, and somehow still human. Tomorrow you'll follow Mary to work. But tonight, you sleep where you sit, your back against the wall, head tilting forward, listening to the city breathe through thin wooden boards. Morning doesn't arrive so much as it creeps in, grey, reluctant and damp. You wake with a stiff neck and a crick in your spine from sleeping upright against the wall, your body half folded like laundry. The fire's gone out, and the air has taken on a cold, mildewy bite. Somewhere above you, someone is already stomping around, boots clumping across old floorboards that groan in protest. One of the children coughs, a deep rattling sound that seems far too serious for a 5-year-old. It keeps going, and going. You blink away the last cobwebs of sleep and watch Agnes lift the boy from his nest of blankets. She barely reacts to the noise coming from his chest. It's just another sound, like rain on the roof or a pot boiling over. He's wrapped tighter in a shawl, then set near the fire as she starts working to relight it. A flint sparks. The first crackle of flame is coaxed from damp kindling. Smoke curls up and out through the crooked chimney. The day begins. You're stepping outside again, and the air smells faintly of coal dust and something worse. Human waste. You nearly slip on the slick cobblestones outside the door. A long brown stain oozes its way toward the gutter, and you realise belatedly that the chamber pot's been emptied recently. It's not the only one. A row of them lines the alley edge, each one waiting for someone brave, or desperate, enough to do the honours. Welcome to Sanitation Slum Edition. In the best parts of town, houses are starting to connect to primitive sewer systems. Water pumps are placed strategically, and some lucky homes even have indoor facilities. But here, in the maze of the courts and alleys, your options are bleak. Most of the privies are shared by 10, sometimes 20 households, and the waste. It goes into a cesspool beneath or behind the building, left to stew in the dark. When it overflows, as it often does, it seeps into basements. Floors buckle, walls mould. Breathing becomes an act of bravery. And that's if you even have a privy. Some buildings never got one. People do what they must. Gutters, buckets, quiet corners. Children are taught from an early age to step carefully and mind the smell. You hear of one landlord who locked the privy to keep the neighbours out. Another simply let his tenants handle it, and refused to pay for the cost of emptying the cesspool. These are the kinds of choices that turn inconvenience into illness. You follow Mary around the side of the building as she grabs a battered tin pail and heads for the nearest pump. It's only a few blocks away, and already a line has formed. Women and older children clutching empty jugs and pails, shuffling in the chill, whispering complaints under their breath. The pump squeaks as it's pulled, sending out a gurgle of water that smells vaguely of iron and dirt. This pump, unlike many, isn't too close to a cesspool, but not all of them are so well placed. It's one of the big debates of the time. How much disease comes from the air and how much from the water? Some doctors still believe in miasma, that filth creates poisonous vapours that make people sick. Others are beginning to suspect something smaller, more invisible, might be the culprit. Germs, though still just a whisper of an idea, are gaining ground. But you don't need a medical degree to know that something here is killing people. Cholera has already swept through Manchester multiple times by now. 1832, 1848, and again in the early 1850s. Whole families gone in days. It hits hardest in neighbourhoods like this one, where people drink from the same source they wash and defecate near. There are no quarantines, no safety nets, just the grim efficiency of death. You hear about one outbreak where a landlord refused to clean a cesspool despite pleas from tenants. The stench grew unbearable. People began to vomit just walking past it. When finally emptied, weeks too late, it was discovered that the decomposing waste had been soaking into the building's walls. The entire structure had to be condemned. Not that it stopped someone from moving in again a few days later. This is why a child's cough sends a ripple of fear through the room. Not because it's rare, but because it's not. You head back with Mary, bucket in hand. It's heavier than you expected. Along the way, she tells you matter-of-factly that her cousin died of the runs last summer. That's how they talk about it. The runs, or the fever, or just wasting away. You don't hear words like dysentery or typhoid, not because they don't exist, but because names don't matter when the result is always the same. Here's a quirky fact for you. Manchester's night soil, yes, that's exactly what you think it is, was sometimes sold to farmers outside the city. Carted out in the dead of night, it was euphemistically called London's gold, despite originating up north. A whole grimy economy revolved around what people flushed, or didn't. Back at the house, Agnes takes the water and begins scrubbing clothes in the same basin that later serves as the bathtub. The soap is harsh, made from animal fat and lye, and it stings your nose even from a few feet away. She beats the clothes against a flat stone, humming softly under her breath, the tune barely rising above the rhythm of her work. She's not doing laundry because it's laundry day. She's doing it because the kids have lice again. You watch as she boils water on the fire, then pours it over their bedding. It's the only way to kill the eggs. She'll hang the sheets out, smoke the straw from the mattress, and maybe, just maybe, buy a new comb this week, if there's any money left after bread. Historians still argue whether the public health crises in slums like this were truly the fault of rapid industrialisation, or the failure of early governments to regulate housing and infrastructure. Some say the cities grew too fast to keep up. Others point out that reforms weren't even attempted until the upper classes began catching cholera too. Suddenly, sanitation wasn't just a poor problem. Either way, people like Agnes didn't have time to debate it. They cleaned what they could, when they could, and prayed for dry weather. Rain made everything worse. The courtyards flooded, the gutters overflowed, and the stink climbed the walls like ivy. You notice now, as the day crawls forward, just how damp the city is. The walls sweat, the windows fog. Your skin feels constantly clammy, like it never dries. Even indoors, there's a smell of slow rot. It's in the floorboards, the plaster, the bedsheets. You imagine this is what it would be like to live inside a lung, wet, noisy, and always a breath away from collapse. Outside, someone shouts, and you see a crowd forming near the edge of the court. A child's fallen in the gutter. No one panics. 2 boys help her out. She's crying, soaked to the waist, but not injured. Agnes clicks her tongue. It's the 3rd this week, she mutters. Same spot. And then goes back to scrubbing. It's not shock, it's maintenance. You're up before the sun, and so is Mary. You'd think, being a child, she'd sleep in whenever possible, but no. Her eyes snap open the moment she hears the rooster crow 3 courts over. No one owns a clock here, of course, but there's a rhythm to the neighbourhood, and Mary's learned to read it like music. The soft footsteps overhead. That's the bricklayer leaving for the early shift. The coal cart rumbling down the alley. That's your 5-minute warning. Time to move. She dresses quickly and quietly, pulling on a threadbare dress, a shawl full of holes, and boots stuffed with paper to cover the places where the soles have worn through. You see her rub the crust from her eyes and tie her hair back with a bit of string. Then she looks at you with the sort of expression that says, "Well, come on then," and you realise you're going with her. The air outside is sharper than before, with a bite that gets through even your thickest layer. Everything is still damp. The cobbles glisten with whatever filth settled during the night. The sky's the colour of wet ash, and fog curls low against the buildings. The city is waking up, but slowly, like it resents having to do so at all. You pass rows of identical houses, narrow, brick, soot-stained. Some doors hang open, revealing rooms no larger than cupboards. Others are shut tight, with fabric wedged in the cracks to keep out the cold. You smell smoke, onions frying, and something distinctly chemical. Manchester is a stew of scents, and half of them shouldn't be inhaled for long. Mary walks quickly. She knows the route too well. She's been doing this for nearly a year now, ever since her family needed the extra coins to stay afloat. She's one of thousands. Child labour isn't the exception, it's the norm. Children as young as 5 work here, not because they want to, but because not working is a luxury only the rich can afford. You reach the mill as the factory bell rings out, a long, low groan of a sound that echoes through the fog like a threat. You're standing before a towering brick structure, 4 stories tall, with rows of black windows like dead eyes. Smoke churns from tall chimneys above, billowing into the grey sky until the whole horizon looks bruised. The mill looms. You follow Mary inside, ducking under the arm of a foreman who barely looks at her. He knows her, knows she's never late, that she works fast and doesn't complain unless it's something serious, like a missing finger. The noise hits you like a fist. It's constant, deafening. Machines clatter and snap, belts spin, gears grind. You feel it in your teeth, in the soles of your feet. Conversations are impossible. People communicate with hand gestures, nods, and practice stares. Mary moves through it all like a dancer who's memorised every step. She takes her place at a spinning frame, one of dozens lined in perfect, miserable rows. Her job? to clean and thread broken strands of cotton as they snap. She has to move fast. If she's too slow, the machine jams, or worse, someone loses a hand. Children are often chosen for this task because their small fingers can fit into spaces adults can't reach. Efficiency through endangerment. You stand near the wall, trying to stay out of the way, though no one would notice if you vanished. The workers are ghosts already, cloaked in lint, their faces pale, mouths set in tight, exhausted lines. You see one boy, maybe 8, coughing uncontrollably. No one flinches. He keeps working. The cough is normal. Everyone here breathes the same choking air day in, day out. This cotton dust, called fly, fills the lungs. There's a name for it, of course. Byssinosis, mill fever, brown lung. It starts with a tickle, moves to a cough, and ends in slow suffocation. But that's later. For now, Mary threads cotton with nimble fingers, pulling and twisting with the speed of someone who knows that slowing down might cost her more than a wage. You learn that a typical shift runs 12 hours, 6 days a week, with 2 short breaks. Lunch is whatever you can bring. Bread, maybe a bit of cold porridge. There's no cafeteria, no break room, just a corner, a wall, and a minute to chew before the machines roar back to life. You glance around at the adults. Many are women. Their faces are hollow, lined with dirt and fatigue. One adjusts a headscarf over hair that's been thinned by years of exposure to chemicals. Another has lost part of her ear. Caught in the spinning jenny months ago. There was no compensation. She just came back to work with a bandage and the knowledge that next time she should lean further away. The foreman circles the room like a hawk, his boots echoing on the stone floor. He carries a cane, not for walking. It's a reminder. You see a girl near the back start to doze off just for a second. The cane slaps down on a nearby table and she jumps. No words are exchanged, just fear. Now for your strange fact of the day, some factory owners actually installed ventilation systems, not for the workers' health, but to reduce the chance of fires. Cotton dust is incredibly flammable. One stray spark, and the whole building can go up like dry straw. A few enlightened mill owners thought it was wise to keep the air clean enough that their machines didn't burn down. Worker safety was just a lucky byproduct. And here's a historical debate still swirling. Did the Industrial Revolution liberate working-class women and children by offering them wages and a role in society? Or did it trap them in brutal cycles of exhaustion and early death? Some argue it was a step toward empowerment. Wages meant choices, however limited. Others say the factories were just new cages, this time made of brick and coal dust. You check back on Mary. She's still working. She hasn't stopped once. Her fingers blur as she knots broken threads and feeds cotton into the humming machines. A small blister on her thumb pops, and she doesn't even wince. This is just another day. Hours pass. The light outside dims again. You lose all sense of time. Everything is grey, clattering, endless. Finally a whistle blows. Machines power down one by one like giants falling asleep. Mary wipes her hands on her dress and joins the line of workers filing out. Her eyes are red. Her nose is running. She's too tired to speak. You walk home beside her in silence, stepping over puddles and broken bricks, dodging the occasional cart. The streets are darker now. Fires burn in alleyways. Laughter echoes from a nearby tavern. But Mary doesn't look up. She's focused on getting home, on food, on rest, on the few hours of quiet before it all begins again. Back in the slum, Agnes takes one look at her daughter's blistered hands and sighs. She gently dabs them with a bit of vinegar and wraps them in cloth torn from an old pillowcase. No complaints, no pity, just care. This is the rhythm of work in Victorian Manchester, and tomorrow it will happen again. You wake to the sound of coughing, deep, guttural and far too close. It's coming from above, below, and beside you. A chorus of lungs playing a tune that no one wants to hear. The kind of cough that rattles windows. The kind of cough that gets ignored because if people started counting, they'd lose track. You open your eyes slowly. There's still no real light in the room. Just that bluish-grey haze that means morning is technically here, even if the sun is still shy about showing its face. Mary's already gone to the mill again. You missed her leaving. Her feet are quieter than they were yesterday. Or maybe you're just more tired now. You step outside into the alley and immediately wish you hadn't. The air tastes like dry smoke and wet ash, and your eyes start to sting. Everything's grey, and not in a poetic, foggy Victorian drama kind of way, more like the inside of a furnace that someone left open too long. Manchester's air is famous, but not for anything good. The soot settles on everything: walls, windows, clothing, skin. Your fingernails are already rimmed in black no matter how often you scrub them. The factory chimneys, those proud monuments to progress, have been belching coal smoke all night. You can actually taste the Industrial Revolution here, and it tastes like burnt metal. You head out, driven by a mix of curiosity and morbid fascination, and follow the haze toward one of the biggest cotton mills in the district. It's mid-morning, and the streets are already busy. Wagons creak under the weight of goods. Boys on the corners shout headlines from dirty sheets of newsprint. Somewhere nearby, a butcher is hacking something unidentifiable, with a rhythm that suggests practice. The city breathes out smoke, and you breathe it in whether you want to or not. The mill towers above you like a cathedral to labour. Red brick, soot-dusted windows smeared with a film that hasn't seen glass cleaner in decades, if ever. The chimneys rise like columns, thick black clouds rolling out of them like ink across a page. You try not to inhale too deeply as you step inside. Inside the mill, the sound is even worse today. The looms are running at full tilt and the air is thick with cotton fibres. You can barely see across the room through the haze of fly dancing in the weak light. You instinctively hold your breath, but it doesn't matter. After 2 minutes, you're coughing too, your throat raw, your eyes watering. Workers are bent over machines, their faces expressionless, like they left their emotions outside with their coats. You notice the coughing isn't just you. Everyone here is coughing. Small coughs, big coughs, wet coughs. One girl near the window coughs so hard she nearly collapses. A boy pulls out a filthy rag and spits into it. You catch a glimpse of pink. Blood? Maybe. He folds the cloth like it's nothing and keeps working. No one reacts. The mill air is dry, but it clings to your lungs like it has teeth. The problem is the cotton. Endless clouds of dust stirred up by the machines, inhaled by every mouth and nose in the building. The lungs can't filter it fast enough. Over time, it hardens in the chest. Workers complain of tightness, dizziness, shortness of breath, but they keep working, because there's no other choice. And here's where you learn one of the less glamorous truths of Victorian industry. Factory owners knew. Oh, they knew the air was bad. They knew their workers got sick, but ventilation costs money, and open windows let in cold air which slows production. A few reformers, mostly doctors, started raising alarms in the 1830s and 1840s. But progress was slow. There was always another excuse, another profit margin to protect. You don't fix a system that's making you rich, even if it's killing people. Your quirky fact for the day: some workers actually ate molasses before starting their shifts, believing it would coat their throats and lungs and protect them from the cotton dust. It didn't, but it gave them something sweet to hold on to, and in this place, that's no small thing. As you move through the building, you pass a small side room labelled hospital, though the term is generous. It's more of a closet with a cot and a basin. The nurse is an old woman who used to work the looms but lost 3 fingers in an accident and now keeps an eye on the sick and injured. You peer inside. A boy lies on the cot, shivering under a threadbare blanket. His face is pale. His lips are dry and cracked. The woman shakes her head at you and whispers, "Lungs gone." Tuberculosis, consumption, the wasting disease. Call it what you like, it's everywhere. The mills are breeding grounds for it. Close quarters, poor air, constant exhaustion. You ask how long the boy's been sick, she shrugs. Weeks? Months? Doesn't matter. He's not going home. And here's the debate you'll fall asleep thinking about. Did the factories kill more people than they employed? Statistically, it's unclear. Wages were higher in the city than in the countryside. Life expectancy, however, was often lower. In some Manchester districts, a man's average lifespan was under 30. A woman's, even less. Children, often less than 5 years, if they survived infancy at all. Some historians argue that progress always comes with sacrifice. Others ask, whose lives are we sacrificing, and why do we always seem to sacrifice the same ones? You step outside into the grey again, lungs aching, eyes burning. The air outside feels fresher, but only by comparison. The fog hasn't lifted. It never really does here. The soot settles like snow on your shoulders, and you brush it off without thinking. You head back toward the court. passing women leaning out windows to beat the dust from their rugs. The rugs are mostly old sacks, but they're beaten anyway. A man coughs behind you, a dry barking sound, and spits onto the street. A dog noses at it, uninterested, and moves on. This is normal. Back at the house, Agnes has opened the window a crack to let in some fresh air. The smoke inside is less noticeable than in the street, but not by much. She's boiling water in a pot that's more rust than metal, throwing in scraps of herbs and onion skins. She's trying to keep the children from catching whatever's going around, or more accurately, trying to slow it down. You sit in the corner and watch her work. She doesn't speak much today. Her face is drawn, and you notice the lines around her mouth have deepened. Her youngest, Sam, still has that cough. She presses a hand to his forehead, feels the heat, and doesn't flinch. You try to imagine living like this, breathing like this, every breath a gamble, every inhale a reminder, and then you remember you are living like this now, for a while anyway. The soot has settled into your clothes, into your skin, into your thoughts, and tonight, when you close your eyes, you'll still hear the machines and feel the weight in your chest, like a hand pressing gently, patiently down. It's getting dark when you find yourself drawn toward a strange kind of glow, flickering from behind the warped shutters of a building that leans slightly, like it's had one too many bad nights and never quite recovered. There's a sign above the door, hand-painted and barely legible through the layers of grime and soot. The Hare and Whistle. That's not its real name, probably. Everyone in the neighbourhood just calls it the Whistle. It's a public house, but in these parts it's more like a second living room, just with worse lighting and more swearing. As you push open the door, the first thing that hits you is the warmth. Real heat. Firelight. The heavy scent of old ale soaked into wooden floors. It's like stepping into a furnace that runs on sweat and tobacco. Your eyes adjust to the dim interior and you're greeted by the low rumble of voices, the scrape of a fiddle in the corner, and the occasional sharp burst of laughter that breaks through the haze like a firecracker. This is the local tavern, one of dozens in this area of Manchester alone. In fact, it's estimated that at one point there was one pub for every 20 houses in some working-class neighbourhoods. That's not a statistic. It's a coping mechanism. The room is long and narrow, ceilings low, beams stained black with smoke. The crowd inside is a mix of factory workers, bricklayers, delivery boys, and a few older women who drink with the determination of retired prize-fighters. Tankards clink against cracked wood. There's sawdust on the floor, meant to soak up the spills, though it mostly mixes with mud and worse. You don't know anyone here, but no one seems to care. A woman with a red scarf pats the bench beside her and says something indecipherable through a thick brogue. You sit because that's what you do here. Sit and be human for a while. The barkeep, a man who looks carved from walnut and grief, slides a cup of something vaguely golden toward you. No asking, no payment yet. It smells sharp, like apples left out in the sun too long, and burns your nose just from the sniff. You take a sip. It's not good. It's some kind of cider, or maybe gin, or maybe both. It's hard to tell. But it's warm, and it does something to the tight knot in your chest. You understand now why people come here. You understand why someone might spend their last farthing not on bread, but on this. It's not just about drink. It's about escape, about silence that isn't lonely, about music, conversation, and the rare luxury of choosing how you feel, even if it's just for an hour. You look around and start to recognize the unspoken rules of the place. There's a section near the fire where the older regulars huddle, men who've seen more years in mills than most have been alive. They drink slowly, methodically, with the grim patience of men whose lungs are half coal dust. A woman in a patched shawl nurses a baby with one arm and a pint with the other. No one blinks. Near the door, a card game is in progress. Quiet, but tense. A pile of coins in the middle. Someone is losing badly, judging by the way he keeps scratching his head and glancing at the exit. But no one's fighting yet. That comes later. Pubs like this aren't just about drink, they're social hubs. Places where gossip spreads faster than fire. Where news is shared, deals are struck, grievances aired, and songs are born. Some are bawdy, some are sad, most are both. You hear one now, a slow ballad about a girl who fell in love with a factory boy who never came home. It's being sung by a man with a voice like gravel in molasses. The room stills as the last verse fades. Then someone shouts for another round and the spell breaks. The barkeep tells you offhandedly that the tavern's been raided twice this month. Once by the constables looking for illegal spirits, once by a few dock thieves chasing a man who'd crossed them. The bar survived both. Walls don't remember much, he says, wiping a mug with a rag that somehow makes it dirtier. Good thing too. Here's a fun little fringe fact for tonight. Gin wasn't just a drink in Victorian England. It was a full-blown cultural panic. People blamed it for everything from crime to poverty to the moral collapse of society. The term mother's ruin came from gin, and in places like Manchester, where cheap gin was sold by the cupful in cellar bars, it was both poison and comfort. A vice, yes, but also a relief. Public health reformers railed against places like this, arguing that they were dens of vice and laziness. But if you listen closely, you'll hear something else. Stories, laughter, familiar greetings. These people know each other. They survive together. And maybe, just maybe, a few pints help with that. The debate that still stirs among historians? Was alcohol the problem, or the only thing keeping people from falling apart? Some argue that drink worsened the plight of the poor, siphoning off what little money they had and driving violence in the home. Others insist it was a survival tool, something to dull the edges of lives lived in relentless hardship. The truth, of course, is murky, like the gin. You watch as a man slams down a coin and yells something about his boss docking his wages for being 5 minutes late. Another man joins in, then another. Soon you've got half a dozen grumbling in unison about fat factory bastards and their never-ending list of rules. For a moment it feels like revolution might be fermenting in the foam of their drinks, but it fades, it always does. Rage is expensive, pints are cheaper. You stay until the coals in the hearth are glowing low and the fiddle has long since been put away. The crowd thins. Some stumble out into the cold night, arms slung around each other singing. Others linger in corners, eyes closed, swaying gently. No one tells you to leave. But eventually you stand, nod to the barkeep and make your way back into the dark. The cold slaps you instantly. The warmth of the pub is gone like a dream, and you're back in Manchester proper, wet, gaslit and unforgiving. The courts are quiet now. The city feels asleep, or something close to it. You crawl into your corner of the room, still warm from the bodies packed around you. Agnes doesn't ask where you've been. She can smell it on your breath. She just gives you a look, a tired one, and pulls her youngest child closer under the blankets. Sleep comes easier tonight despite the hard floor, or maybe because of it. You wake up with a taste in your mouth like old pennies and ash. Your head throbs, not from drinking, though that certainly didn't help, but from the sheer volume of everything. Noise, smoke, bodies, stories. Morning slips into the room like a trespasser, pale and sluggish. The light is a watery grey, and it drips through the cracked window pane as though apologising for being here. Outside, the slum is already in motion. You hear boots on cobblestones, the slosh of water being flung from a basin, the distant bark of a dog that always sounds on the edge of a nervous breakdown. You pull on your coat, which smells unmistakably of damp beer, smoke, and something vaguely medicinal, possibly gin. As you shuffle out the door, your boots squish faintly. You decide not to look down. Today you're tracing the scent trail of the cheapest, strongest drink available to the desperate and the broke. Gin. Not the sleek stuff you sip in a trendy bar garnished with cucumber and smugness. No, this is slum gin. Street gin. Unregulated, unlabelled, and sometimes bordering on toxic. The people here call it strip-you-naked juice, or blue ruin. If you're lucky, it just gives you a headache. If you're not, well, there are stories. You start your hunt by following the sound of hollow laughter and broken glass. It leads you around a corner, down a set of crumbling stone steps, and into a cellar bar so dim you wonder if sunlight ever dared to enter. It's barely noon, but already half a dozen people are hunched at the bar, each holding a glass of something that smells like floor polish and burnt sugar. The air is thick. No windows, no fire, just sweat and the slow evaporation of spirits that probably violate several natural laws. The bartender, a wiry man with one eye that doesn't quite face forward, gives you a toothless grin. "Morning, love," he croaks. "Come for your breakfast?" He laughs at his own joke, a dry wheeze that turns into a cough and then somehow keeps going. You nod because what else do you do, and he slaps a tin cup on the counter. The gin is cloudy, almost milky. It smells like it could power a small boat. You take a sip and it burns with the fury of 1,000 hangovers. There's a faint aftertaste of licorice and regret. It's not pleasant. But you understand. You understand why someone would drink this before noon, after a night shift, or instead of eating. Because for a few minutes, maybe even an hour, you forget the cold, the noise, the ache in your back that's never quite gone. A woman next to you downs hers in one go, wipes her mouth with her sleeve and starts humming. She has no shoes, just rag-wrapped feet. Her hands shake, but her voice is steady, and the tune is familiar. You can't name it, but it wraps around your ribs and settles there. She doesn't speak, just hums and sways and stares at something only she can see. And here's the darker truth. Drinking isn't just escape here, it's survival. It dulls pain, physical and emotional. It blunts hunger. It softens grief. It even warms the body, though that's a cruel trick. The warmth is fake, and the chill comes back worse. But for those who have nothing else, this cup is a lifeline. You learn from the bartender, who seems to enjoy chatting between coughs, that this gin wasn't made in a proper distillery. It was likely produced in someone's basement, boiled in a tin still, filtered through cloth, and flavoured with turpentine or sulphuric acid to give it that extra kick. Sometimes they add a hint of juniper, for class. Other times, it's whatever they had on hand. Oil of vitriol, camphor, old herbs. The results are inconsistent at best, fatal at worst, and yet, it sells. At a halfpenny a glass, it's cheaper than tea, which to be honest isn't saying much when tea costs money you don't have. Now here's your quirky fact of the day. In the worst of the slum districts, gin was sometimes served from coin-operated machines. No, seriously. Drop a coin in, and out trickled a shot of the good stuff, if you were lucky. If not, you got water, or vinegar, or someone else's spit. But people lined up anyway, because the promise of gin, even bad gin, was enough. You climb back out of the cellar after a while, your nose tingling, your balance slightly off. The light outside feels rude after the shadowy hush of the gin den. You squint as you walk, only to realise that most people here are squinting anyway, not just because of light, but because of what's ahead. There's nothing to look forward to, not really, just another shift, another bill, another funeral. You pass a man sleeping in a doorway wrapped in a coat that once might have been blue. His beard is full of crumbs and something green. You hope it's herbs. You hear someone mutter, "That's old Cobb," and then whisper, "Lost his son in the canal," went soft in the head. The speaker shrugs, drinks the gin with the flowers in it. You're not sure what that means, and you're not sure you want to. People drink in the slums for many reasons, some because of loss, some because of boredom, some because they've done the math and realised that over the course of a month gin is cheaper than meat, and it doesn't rot. The reformers, of course, have plenty to say about it. They print pamphlets with sad-eyed women and children begging their father to come home. They preach about morality, self-control, and the virtues of abstinence. But they don't come down here. They don't drink the gin. They don't watch someone sell the last trinket their mother left them just to buy another pint of mercy. The ongoing debate among historians is whether these reform efforts helped or hurt. Did temperance movements actually lift people out of poverty? Or did they just lay a shame on top of suffering? There were certainly cases where community support and structured sobriety saved lives. But for every well-run mission hall, there were 10 judgmental tracts that ignored the basic problem. People weren't drinking to be wicked. They were drinking because they were drowning. You take a detour through an alley behind a row of lodging houses and find another impromptu gin vendor, a woman selling from a jug, pouring into chipped cups held out by a half-circle of weary faces. She could be 30 or 60. It's hard to tell. Her hands are cracked. Her eyes are kind in a tired sort of way. She knows everyone's name, everyone's story. She gives one extra splash to a man limping, says nothing, moves on. No signage, no payment records, just the unspoken understanding that if she's caught she'll be fined, maybe jailed, but she'll keep selling, because there's no other job, no other money, and people still want to forget. Back home, Agnes is boiling bones into broth. The smell fills the room, thick and sour. Mary sits nearby, darning socks with bleeding fingers. You catch a whiff of the gin still on your breath, and it sours in your stomach. Agnes doesn't look up. "You went to the whistle," she says. Not a question, a statement. You nod. Her tone is flat, Just don't bring it home. And that's it. That's the whole lecture. You lie down on your patch of floor, your body aching in places you didn't know could ache. The house is quiet except for the slow simmer of the pot and the occasional creak of the ceiling above. The gin has worn off. The fog in your head is lifting, but the cold is creeping back in. Tomorrow someone else will be pouring, someone else will be forgetting. The streets are quiet at night, but that kind of quiet never means peace. It's the quiet before something cracks. The sky's gone a muddy purple, heavy with clouds, and the fog that's always lurking in Manchester has thickened into something more solid. You can't see far, and sound plays tricks. Footsteps echo from all directions, voices murmur just out of sight, and every so often a sharp whistle cuts the air. Not the bird kind, the kind that means someone's watching. You stick close to the brick walls as you walk. The gaslights are few and far between here, and half of them barely work. Their flames flicker weakly inside grimy glass globes, making more shadow than light. You're heading toward a crossroads where things tend to happen. Not officially, of course. Official things happen in offices. Here, it's more like rumours with legs. That's where you see them. Two men in long coats and tall hats, walking with the slow confidence of people who know they can't be touched. They carry nightsticks, short, polished, heavy. Their boots are spotless, which feels like an insult. You press back into the shadows and watch them move through the fog like phantoms with pensions. These are the local bobbies, the police. Now, if you're imagining Victorian constables as friendly chaps who tip their hats and say, "Evening, madam," you've wandered into the wrong story. These ones don't make much eye contact, and they're not here to be liked. Their job is to keep order, and order, in the slums, usually means reminding the poor to stay in their place. They patrol in pairs, swinging their sticks and peering into alleys. Most of the time, they walk right past the messes. Drunks curled in doorways, kids fighting over crusts, couples shouting at each other like war's just broken out. But now and then, something sets them off. You witness it just a few steps away. A boy, maybe 10, maybe less, is running, barefoot and panicked, clutching a sack. One of the constables sees him and takes off after him without a word. The other hangs back. A chase in these alleys is mostly theatre. The boy doesn't stand a chance. His path is predictable, and sure enough, a few seconds later, he skids around the corner right into the other bobby's arm. The sack bursts. Potatoes scatter across the cobbles. There's a moment, a sharp, frozen second, where you think they'll let him go. Just a child, after all. Then the first constable returns, red-faced and smug, and without hesitation, cuffs the boy hard enough to knock him sideways. The second one doesn't even blink. He just gathers the potatoes and tucks them under his arm. The boy's crying now, curled on the ground, arms over his head. One of the men hauls him up by the collar. "Off to the station with you," he says, like he's discussing the weather. You hear a door creak nearby. A woman peeks out, face drawn, mouth tight. She sees the boy. Her son, maybe. Or a neighbour's. She doesn't say a word, just closes the door again. No one helps. You want to. But your feet won't move. Maybe you're scared. Maybe you understand deep down that this is how it works. The police protect property. The sack of potatoes belongs to someone with a storefront and a name. The boy? He's replaceable. The system doesn't say that out loud, but you can hear it in every boot step. Later, someone will tell you the boy got 2 weeks at the juvenile reformatory. That's generous, really. Could have been a workhouse. Could have been transportation. Yes, that was still a thing. Children as young as 8 sent off to Australia for stealing bread. Reform, they called it. Geography as punishment. You pass by the station later, a squat brick building with barred windows and a wooden sign above the door that says Public Order. Inside, a man is shouting. You can hear the slap of fists on wood. Another voice responds, calmer but no less dangerous. The station door creaks open and a figure stumbles out. A man, maybe 30, with blood on his lip and gin on his breath. He doesn't look angry, he looks resigned. Here's your quirky little fact of the evening. Victorian Manchester had silent patrols, undercover constables assigned to listen at street corners and public houses. They were trained to eavesdrop, to record names, to memorise faces. You'd never know they were police. Some were so deep in their roles that locals forgot they were being watched. Think of them as 19th century surveillance, minus the cameras, but just as invasive. And here's a debate that still swirls in academic circles. Were these early police forces truly about public safety, or were they just the long arm of the wealthy? Critics at the time, and now argue that policing was never neutral. The poor were policed more, not because they were more dangerous, but because they were easier to punish. Fewer rights, fewer connections, fewer headlines if things went sideways. Some say the police kept peace in dangerous neighbourhoods. Others say they enforced poverty like it was a law. Back in the alley, the fog has thickened again. You hear glass break somewhere close, a yell, then silence. No bobbies appear. It's not big enough to matter. Not tonight. There are only so many boots, and too many shadows. You head back through the court, passing doors that close as you approach. No one wants questions. No one wants a knock on the door at midnight. You reach home and slide inside just as a patrol passes by. You hold your breath. They don't stop. Just keep walking, sticks tapping, eyes forward. Agnes is sitting by the cold hearth, hands in her lap. She doesn't ask what you saw. She's seen enough of it already. You lie down next to the wall. Mary's asleep, her face slack with exhaustion. The baby's breathing rasps in the darkness. The room smells faintly of soup and coal smoke. It's quiet again. That brittle kind of quiet. The kind that holds its breath. You wonder what the boy is doing right now. If he's still crying. If he has a blanket. If anyone will ask his name. Outside, the constables walk on. It starts with shouting. Not angry shouting, panicked shouting. The kind that cuts through sleep like a knife. You jolt upright on the hard floor, your breath catching before your mind even has time to form a thought. Then comes the thud of running feet outside, the unmistakable sound of something heavy being knocked over, and a cry, sharp, desperate, and quickly silenced. The room around you is stirring, bodies shifting under blankets, faces lifting out of the half-dark. Agnes is already at the window, pulling the thin curtain aside. Her face is unreadable. You crawl over and peer out with her. There's a crowd gathering at the end of the alley, more shouting. You recognise a few of the men, neighbours from the next court, workers from the foundry down by the river. Their voices are tense, bouncing off brick walls, loud enough to draw others from their doorways. You catch snatches of words. Thief, caught him, bastard tried to run. You slip outside and follow the growing noise. The street beyond the court has turned into a scene. A ring of men, some holding sticks, others just using fists. In the centre, a young man lies crumpled, blood streaming from his nose, shirt torn. He's gasping, trying to speak, but his words are lost under the angry chorus of voices surrounding him. Someone kicks him in the ribs. Someone else spits. You ask what happened, and a wiry man near the front says, "He was stealing from the baker. Saw him snatch a loaf and bolt." Didn't get far. You glance at the young man, barely older than Mary, and see the loaf still clutched under one arm, flattened and streaked with grime. He's not a stranger. He lives 2 streets over. His name's Jacob, and his father died in the cholera outbreak last year. His mother took in laundry until her hands swelled and cracked, and now she mostly sits in silence, staring at the fire. Jacob used to sweep at the tannery, but they let him go when his boots wore through and he slipped twice in 1 week. None of that seems to matter now. The crowd isn't police. This is a mob, but it's wearing the face of justice. You notice the shift, the way the tone has changed from outrage to sport. A few of the men are laughing, one has a bottle, cheering each punch like it's a prize fight. It isn't punishment anymore, it's entertainment. But then a shout pierces the chaos. "Leave off! He's had enough!" It's a woman's voice, loud, furious, and close to breaking. Jacob's mother pushes through the crowd, her arms trembling as she lifts her son's head from the ground. The men pull back slightly, muttering. One of them tosses the loaf toward her. It hits the cobbles and rolls into the gutter. Nobody helps her carry him home. You follow at a distance, the weight of what you just saw settling on your chest. That was justice in the slums. Quick, brutal, and uneven. If Jacob had stolen a coin or a piece of cloth from someone's wash line, he might have gotten away with it. But food, that triggers something different. Maybe it's the idea that hunger is a weakness, and weakness threatens the already fragile order. Maybe it's that everyone's starving, and someone taking more than their share feels like betrayal. Later that morning, you wander through a market street where vendors shout half-heartedly behind their carts. Potatoes, bread, fish, if you can call it that. Most of it is already bruised or beginning to rot, but the prices are high anyway. Supplies down, wages are lower. The city's growing, but not evenly. People at the top are making fortunes. People down here are making stew from bones and peelings, and that's if they're lucky. A thin man with a cart of overripe apples swats away a child trying to grab one. The boy runs, laughing, more hungry than mischievous. No one chases him. This is a daily performance. Everyone plays their part. You stop by a group of women clustered around a soup kitchen line. What passes for charity in these parts? A few get bowls of thin broth. Others are turned away because the pot is already empty. You hear one woman say she's been sleeping in the stables with her 2 boys. Another lost her room after her husband vanished with the last of their rent. Drunk himself across town, she mutters. It hits you that theft here isn't about greed, it's about math. How many mouths do you feed? How many hours can you work? How far can a crust of bread stretch before something snaps? Here's your quirky fact for the day. Victorian Manchester once had bread riots. That's not hyperbole. Actual riots, sparked when prices spiked and the poor couldn't afford basic staples. In 1812 and again in the 1840s, mobs stormed bakeries, overturning carts, smashing windows and seizing loaves by the armful. Authorities responded with troops, sabres and gunfire, all over bread. And the scholarly debate? It circles around the concept of moral economy. Some historians argue that the working poor had a shared understanding of fairness, that basic food, even if not free, should at least be attainable. When that line was crossed, when bakers raised prices or merchants hoarded grain, the people felt justified in breaking laws that no longer protected them. Others say it's more chaos than principle. Starvation drives desperation, and desperation has no ethics. You walk back through the alleys, passing the corner where Jacob was beaten. There's no blood now, just the smear of it, thinned by the morning mist, a reddish ghost on the stone. The city has already moved on. Back home, the children are quiet. Sam is curled in Agnes's lap, too tired even to cry. Mary's fingers are wrapped in cloth, blistered from working the looms again. She tells you she saw the whole thing on her way to work. Her voice is flat, her eyes are dull. He's lucky, she says. At least they didn't string him up like they did that boy in Salford. You blink. They didn't really do that, did they? She shrugs. Maybe. People talk. And that's the thing. Truth here is always wrapped in rumour. You never know what really happened, only what someone saw or heard or said. Sometimes that's worse. As evening settles in, Agnes drops a piece of stale bread into the soup pot, stirring it like it might come back to life. No one mentions Jacob again. No one needs to. His story's written into every cracked wall and empty cupboard in this place. You fall asleep with the sound of Mary coughing and the faint hum of a street preacher shouting in the distance, his voice carried on the damp wind. Repent and you shall be fed. He doesn't say when. The next morning there's a knock at the door. Not the sharp rap of a constable or the limp knock of a landlord, but a polite, measured tap like someone asking to borrow sugar they don't actually need. Agnes pauses with her hands in a basin of cloudy water and tilts her head. You all go still. The air tightens. Then, with a sigh, she dries her hands and opens the door just a crack. A woman stands there in fine boots and a bonnet too clean for this neighbourhood. Her cheeks are rosy, her gloves spotless, and she holds a notebook like a sword. She smells faintly of lavender and disapproval. "Good morning," she chirps, all syrup and teeth. "I'm with the Manchester Benevolent Ladies Association. We're surveying homes in the district and distributing assistance where most needed." Agnes doesn't respond. She just opens the door wider and steps aside. You're not sure whether it's an invitation or a dare. Either way, the woman enters, her boots clipping across the damp floor as her eyes scan everything like she's taking inventory. The pile of blankets, the empty fireplace, the cracked wash basin, the children still huddled together on the floor. Her nose twitches slightly. "I see," she murmurs, scribbling furiously. "And how many reside here?" 6, Agnes replies flatly. "Father employed?" "At the mill." "Children working?" 2 girls, 1 part-time, Mary's at the looms, another scribble. The visitor doesn't sit, though there's nowhere to sit anyway. She opens a small canvas bag and pulls out a wrapped parcel. "We've brought soap," she says, as though she's just handed over gold bars, "and a tract." She hands over a folded pamphlet titled Temperance, the first step to salvation, in ornate lettering. Underneath, a blurry drawing of a sad-eyed mother holding a baby beside an empty gin bottle. Agnes accepts both wordlessly. "I'd be happy to come back with more supplies," the woman adds, still standing near the doorway, notebook clutched to her chest like a shield. but only if there's a clear commitment to improvement. The association believes in helping those who help themselves. Agnes finally looks her in the eye. Soap don't feed the children. The visitor falters, just for a second. Then she smiles again, tight, businesslike, and steps back toward the door. Well, she says, cleanliness is next to godliness. And just like that, she's gone, her boots clicking away down the alley like punctuation. You turn to Agnes, waiting for her to say something. She doesn't. She just tosses the tract on the hearth and opens the parcel of soap, which smells strong enough to knock out a small ox. At least it's hard, she mutters. Might last a week. That's Charity in the Slums, a lecture wrapped in lavender. It's not all bad. Some of the associations really do bring food, medicine, clothes. But there's always a cost. Not in shillings, but in dignity. You can have help, but you have to earn it with piety, obedience, and a face scrubbed clean of defiance. Later that day, you wander past a different sort of charitable enterprise, the local mission house, a large brick building with peeling white paint and windows too high to peer into. Inside, they offer meals, baths, prayers, and sermons, in that order, if you're lucky. You walk in with a few others, mostly men, some women, many children. The line forms fast, and you're herded into a large, cold room, where benches line the walls and the smell of overboiled vegetables hangs like fog. You're handed a bowl of soup, thin, pale, and lukewarm. It tastes of potatoes and compromise, but it's food. The woman beside you eats quickly, barely chewing, as though afraid someone might snatch the bowl back. Her son, barely 3, dunks bread into his and then licks the spoon like it's dessert. Before you've finished, the prayer begins. A tall man in a threadbare black coat climbs onto a crate and raises a hand. Brothers and sisters, he booms, we are gathered in grace, but grace is not free. You must turn from sin, from gin, from sloth and idleness. The Lord helps those who help themselves. You glance around. Some bow their heads. Others just stare into their soup. A few have that far-off look, the one people wear when their body's here, but the rest of them has slipped out for a walk. The preacher continues, louder now. I've seen the drink take good men and turn them into beasts. I've seen women, mothers, ruin their homes with a single bottle. But there is another way. There is redemption. There's a call and response rhythm to it. He pauses, and a few in the crowd murmur back, Amen, or something like it. He speaks not just with fire, but with a script honed from repetition. You wonder how many sermons he's given, how many lives he thinks he's saved. After the speech, another tract is handed out, this one featuring a diagram of the human liver and a list of 10 steps to moral hygiene. You're ushered toward a washroom, where a basin of lukewarm water waits. 1 towel, no soap. A boy next to you splashes his face and mutters, better than nothing. You can't decide if he believes that. Here's your quirky little side note. Some mission halls offered tokens, wooden coins you could exchange for meals or clean clothing, but you had to earn them by attending Bible lessons or pledging sobriety. In some areas, these tokens became a kind of underground currency, traded for goods or favours. Faith, it turns out, was negotiable, and now a debate still echoing through scholarly circles. Were these philanthropic missions more about lifting people up or keeping them in line? Some argue the help was genuine, well-meaning attempts to fight the poverty the state refused to address. Others believe it was all about control. Feed the poor, but only if they behave. Clean them, but only if they pray. No agency, just conditional mercy. You head back out into the damp dusk, the soup warming your stomach, but not much else. You pass a woman scrubbing her doorstep with the new bar of soap from the association, her hands red and raw. A little girl helps her, humming the tune of a hymn you heard just minutes ago. You reach the house as the sun begins to disappear behind a wall of factory chimneys. Inside, Mary is sewing patches onto Sam's trousers. Agnes holds the tract from earlier in one hand and the bar of soap in the other. What's it say, you ask? She doesn't look up. Says the Lord don't like the smell of us. You sit beside her as the fire flickers low. Outside, the preacher's voice still echoes faintly through the alleys, bouncing off bricks and bones. Inside, there's silence again, the kind filled with unspoken thoughts. Agnes breaks it, finally, with a quiet question. Think we're dirty because we're poor, or poor because we're dirty? You don't have an answer. Neither does anyone else. It's Sunday, the only day of the week that doesn't begin with factory whistles or the hollow thud of boots on wet cobblestones. But don't be fooled. Sunday doesn't mean rest. Not here. The air is still cold, the room still damp, and the stomach still empty. The only real difference is the noise. Instead of looms and carts, it's the droning of hymns and the shuffle of church shoes across cracked stone streets. Agnes is already up, her fingers red from scrubbing Sam's only clean shirt in a tin basin filled with water that's gone cold before she even started. She's humming, just under her breath, something half forgotten and wordless. A lullaby, maybe, or something her own mother used to sing while doing the same kind of work. There's a rhythm to it, a sound of weary peace. You and the children are headed to the local mission again. Not for soup this time, but for what they call Sunday improvement. It's part Sunday school, part lecture, part hygiene clinic, all stuffed into a single dim room behind the chapel. Children are required to attend, more or less. If they want to keep their names on the charity list, they sit, listen, recite, and wash. Always, always wash. You arrive just as the bell rings. The building smells like wet wool and lye soap. The girls are separated from the boys. Older children help the younger ones to find their places. Mary, still nursing blisters on her hands, takes Nellie's and gently pushes her toward a bench where a woman with a chalkboard is writing the word Grace in large block letters. The lessons begin. Today's theme is obedience. There's a scripture reading, slow, laboured, read aloud by a boy with a stammer and a trembling voice. Then come the questions. What is the reward for obedience? Why must we obey our parents, teachers and masters? The answers are memorised. They echo around the room like a chant. Then comes the hand-washing. The children are brought, two at a time, to the back of the hall where volunteers wait with pitchers of tepid water, bars of gritty soap and old towels. Mary goes first, her hands shaking slightly as the volunteer rubs them raw. "Mustn't let yourself get filthy," the woman says gently, but there's an edge to it. Cleanliness pleases God. You see her flinch when the soap hits a blister. Next is Nellie, who's too young to be careful. She splashes, misses the basin and ends up soaking her dress. The volunteer clucks disapprovingly. Unladylike. Nellie's lip trembles, but she doesn't cry. Back at the benches, there's a story time. A tale of a boy who stole a penny and ended up transported to Australia, where he lived among convicts and never saw his family again. It's a parable, of course, meant to scare the sin out of everyone. But the children don't react. They've heard worse. Probably seen worse too. You overhear two boys behind you whispering. One says his brother was caught with a button, just a button, and sent to the workhouse. Didn't even want it, boy mutters, just picked it up. The session ends with a hymn, sung half-heartedly by dry throats and tired lungs. The words are about mercy, but the melody is funereal. It echoes in your ears long after the last note fades. After the children are dismissed, the adults are invited to stay for a temperance talk. Agnes is there now, along with a dozen others. The speaker is a short man with glasses and a booming voice, and he wastes no time. "Drink is the enemy of the poor," he begins. "Gin keeps you weak. Beer keeps you broke. And every penny spent at the tavern is a penny stolen from your own children's mouths." He paces the room like a man preaching fire. "I've seen men come to ruin," he says. "Watch them lose their jobs, their homes, their families, all because of drink. It begins with a taste, a sip, then a pint, then a fall, then the grave." There are murmurs of agreement. A few nods. One woman quietly leaves. Agnes doesn't react. She just stares at the floor, hands folded tightly in her lap. "And women," the speaker continues, "must be the conscience of the home. If your husband drinks, hide his boots. Pour the gin down the drain. Pray for him. Scold him. Save him." The silence after that sentence is thick and electric. You glance at Agnes. Her face hasn't moved. Now, here's your quirky fact of the day. One of the more aggressive temperance groups in Manchester once handed out porcelain pigs to children, tiny hollow piggy banks, with labels that read, "What father spends at the pub could feed a pig." The kids were told to save pennies in them and show their fathers. The results were mixed. Mostly it led to broken pigs and bruised feelings. But the sentiment stuck. The scholarly debate tonight, whether all this moral preaching actually helped the poor or just made them feel worse. Some argue it offered structure, discipline, a sense of purpose. Others believe it added guilt to already impossible lives, demanding perfection in people who had no room left for mistakes. You walk home with the others. Mary is quiet. Nellie skips a little, splashing in puddles, humming the hymn from earlier like she's made peace with it. Agnes doesn't speak the entire way. That evening a neighbour drops by with news. The man 2 courts over drank himself into a ditch and didn't wake up. Left behind 3 kids and a wife who hasn't spoken since. No one acts shocked, just sad. Quietly, uncomfortably sad. You help Agnes hang the laundry near the fire. She mutters, mostly to herself, "No drink in this house." She says it like a promise, or a warning. Outside you hear the whistle of a constable and the bark of a stray dog chasing nothing. Rain begins to fall, slow and steady, turning the streets into rivers of soot. Inside, Mary lays out tomorrow's clothes. Sam is already asleep, coughing into his blanket. Nellie curls against her mother. You lie down and think about the soap, the sermon, the way the children stared at the penny thief story like it was both fiction and biography. Grace, they wrote on the board. You wonder if it ever lived here. The sun never really rises in Manchester. It just sort of struggles through the smoke and smog like it's doing you a personal favour. This morning you're following someone new. He's thin, fast-moving, maybe 12 or 13, with a mop of dark hair and a jacket that's more patchwork than cloth. His name is Jimmy, short for something longer probably, but everyone calls him Rat. You're not sure if it's because of his appearance, his speed, or just the way he seems to know every hole and crevice in this part of the city. Rat's a scavenger, a rag and bone boy, one of a small army of kids who make their living not in factories, but on the edge of society, digging through trash, poking at middens, scraping up anything someone else has left behind. He doesn't punch a clock. He works the city like a scavenger hunt, with rules only he understands. You shadow him through the back lanes of the slums, where the houses get tighter and the air gets sharper with the scent of rot and coal. Rat pulls a battered cart behind him, a crate with wheels nailed on, and inside it the beginnings of his day's collection. A strip of copper wire, a bent spoon, a bit of leather, 2 glass bottles that might not be cracked, and half a candle stub that still has some use if you squint hard enough. He's not working alone. Other kids dart in and out of the alleys, nodding to each other with that wordless street code. There's competition, sure, but also a strange kind of camaraderie. No one's getting rich. Everyone's hungry. They've learned to work around each other, like fish in the same dirty pond. Rat stops at a pile of ash and broken crates near a tannery. He pokes it with a stick, flips a plank and grins. "Lucky," he mutters, pulling out a bit of metal piping. It's rusty and jagged, but it might fetch a penny from the scrap man. Into the cart it goes. Scavengers like Rat are part of a whole unofficial economy, the underlayer of an already bottom-heavy system. They're the unofficial clean-up crew, the recyclers before the word existed. Rags are sold to paper mills. Bones go to the glue factories. Metal gets melted down. Nothing goes to waste, not because of virtue, but because someone, somewhere, will pay a fraction of a penny for it. You follow him to the next stop, a midden yard, a sort of unofficial dumping ground at the edge of a crumbling wall. The stench hits you like a slap. Rotten food, animal guts, human waste. Rat barely reacts. He's seen worse. He hops up on the edge of the pit and starts sorting with the practiced hands of someone who's done this every day of his short life. Found a whole boot once, he tells you. Still had the foot in it. He laughs. You don't. You ask if he's ever gone to school. He shrugs. Went twice. Got hit with a stick. Learned more out here. He points to the pile. This here's arithmetic. Knowing what's worth picking, what's worth carrying. Carry too much junk, you slow down. Move too fast, you miss the good stuff. It's all balance. Rat's a philosopher in rags. He just doesn't know it. Here's your strange little fact for the day. Rag and bone men, especially the older ones, often used rhymes or songs to advertise their services. You'd hear them coming through the streets, singing in flat, nasally tones, any old iron, any rags, bones, bottles. Their voices became part of the city's soundtrack, as familiar as church bells and factory whistles. Kids like Rat didn't sing. They didn't need to. They were the silent collectors. As you follow him down toward the canal, you notice something shift. Rat glances around more often, his steps slow. Don't like this part, he mutters. Too quiet. You soon see why. Another boy, older, broader, steps out from behind a stack of crates. He's got 2 others with him, both with sharp faces and sharper sticks. Rat stops in his tracks. You can almost see the gears turning behind his eyes. The older boy grins. "Find anything good, Rat?" Rat shakes his head. "Just junk. Let me see." There's no real threat in his voice, at least not yet, but you can feel it under the surface. Rat hesitates. Then he pushes the cart forward, letting the older boy poke through it. "Copper's mine," the boy says, pulling out the pipe. "That's worth 2p." Rat doesn't argue, not out loud, but his jaw tightens. The older boys walk off, laughing. Rat watches them disappear into the fog, then turns back to the cart with a sigh. "Could have used that," he mutters. "Mum needs coal." You don't ask more. He wouldn't answer anyway. Here's the debate historians still circle around. Were these scavenger kids victims of neglect, or masters of their own domain? On paper, they had no protection, no education, no future. But many of them had freedom the factory kids didn't. No overseers, no 14-hour days under spinning frames. They carved out their own routes, their own strategies. Some even saved enough to rent rooms for their families, or start little trades of their own. Others disappeared into the fog. Back near the courts, Rat stops at a junk shop with a crooked sign that reads, "Gilbert's Reclaim and Repair." Inside, a man with a crooked back and soot-smudged spectacles takes one look at the contents of the cart and starts doing silent calculations. He points at the spoon, the bottles, the candle stub. 3p, he says. Rat doesn't argue. 3 pennies for half a day's labour. Rat pockets the coins, then disappears down the alley before you can say anything else. You stand for a while, watching the steam rise from a nearby drain, and realise you never asked where he lived. If he lived anywhere. Maybe a stairwell, maybe a cot in a lodging house, maybe nowhere. Back home, Mary has returned from the mill early. The machine broke down and the whole floor was dismissed. Agnes is boiling cloth in a pot to kill lice. She glances up at your boots, now coated in grime. "Been scavenging?" she asks. You nod. She just shakes her head. "That city'll eat you if you're not watching." You sit by the fire with her, passing the time in silence. Outside, the wind shifts, carrying the smell of smoke and the faint echo of someone calling, "Rags and bones!" You wonder if it's Rat. The first sign that something's wrong comes in the form of silence. Not the usual silence, which is never really silent, filled with coughs, creaks, the dull shuffle of feet on stone, but a thicker kind. A hush that feels unnatural, like the air itself is holding its breath. You wake with a heavy feeling in your chest, and not the usual heaviness from coal smoke or bad dreams. No, this is different. Heavier. Closer, Agnes is already sitting near the hearth, her face drawn, eyes red-rimmed. She's holding Sam in her lap. He's limp, pale, and barely breathing. His little chest rises only when it has to, and even then, with effort. You don't ask what's wrong. You already know. Mary's crouched by her mother's side, clutching a rag soaked in water, dabbing Sam's forehead. She's not crying either. No one is. Because here, when a child starts to go quiet like this, everyone knows what it means. They've seen it before. You've seen it before, just not this close. You think back, days ago, maybe a week, when Sam started coughing. It was a dry hack at first. Then came the wheeze, then the heat, then the moments when he didn't want to get up at all. Agnes said it was just a chill, just a bit of fever. Kids get sick all the time, but now he hasn't opened his eyes in nearly a day. You don't move. No one does. Agnes whispers a prayer under her breath. Not for healing, just something softer, gentler, a request maybe, for peace. Mary starts humming, almost like she's trying to sing Sam out of the world instead of into sleep. You've heard stories of people who die with drama, wailing, thrashing, holding on to the final breath like it's something they earned. But here, death comes quietly. It slips in, sits down and waits. No grand gestures, no shouting, just a stillness that spreads like smoke in a sealed room. Hours pass, maybe more. Then comes the sound of a long, slow exhale, and nothing after it. Agnes says nothing. She just gathers Sam closer, rocks him once, twice, and then lays him down on the blanket beside the hearth. Mary stands up slowly and crosses the room to sit in the corner, eyes wide but dry. You finally move. Not because you know what to do, but because doing nothing feels like more of a sin than doing the wrong thing. You reach out, place a hand gently on Agnes's shoulder. She flinches. "Go get Mrs. Platt," she says, her voice low and rough. "She'll know what to do." Mrs. Platt lives 3 doors down and serves as the court's unofficial midwife, undertaker, nurse, and keeper of secrets. You find her hunched over a pot of stew, but when you tell her about Sam, she doesn't hesitate. She wipes her hands on her apron, grabs a small bundle of cloth and follows you back. Inside the house, she doesn't waste time. She kneels by Sam, checks his pulse, listens for breath. Then she nods once and begins preparing the body. It's efficient, respectful, mechanical. She wraps him in a sheet, ties it gently and places him on the table. "There's a man on Water Street," she says. "We'll take him for 3 shillings. 2 if he's feeling kind. Can't promise a box." Agnes doesn't respond. She just nods, her face turned toward the hearth. Mary hasn't moved from her corner. Mrs. Platt glances at you. "We'll need to borrow a cart. That one Jimmy uses for bones. He owes me a favour. You go. Because what else can you do?" Later that day, you help push the cart down the alley, Sam's small wrapped form inside. No one looks. No one asks. A few heads turn, but only for a second. This isn't new. It's part of the rhythm. Another small funeral without songs, without flowers, without a name carved into stone. Here's your haunting little fringe fact of the day. In the worst parts of Victorian Manchester, infant and child death was so common that some families reused burial plots multiple times in the same year. Graveyards overflowed. Public health officials recorded districts where half of all children died before reaching the age of 5. And even those statistics likely undercounted the unregistered, the unnamed, the unclaimed. You reach the undertaker's place, a squat building that smells of old wood and candle wax. A man in a long coat greets you with a nod and a scratch of his chin. He doesn't ask questions, just counts the coins you place in his palm and points to a back room. He takes Sam's body without ceremony, disappearing behind a curtain that sways gently in the cold breeze. Outside, you stare at the building for a long time. Mary is waiting for you when you return. Her face is blank, but her eyes are full of something you don't know how to name. She's already scrubbed the hearth, washed the blanket, folded Sam's clothes into a neat pile in the corner. Agnes is gone for the moment, off to tell the mission maybe, or to sit on a bench somewhere and let the cold do what it does best. That night there's no fire, just silence and shallow breathing. At some point, someone knocks. You open the door to find Mrs. Platt again, this time holding a pot of thin stew and a soft, warm loaf. "For the family," she says. "It's barley." And broth. She doesn't step inside, she just hands it over and walks away. You sit with Mary and Agnes and Nellie eating in near darkness. The bread is soft, the broth tasteless, but no one complains. It's something to do, a moment to fill. Here's the scholarly debate for tonight, as grim as it is constant. Was death in the slums inevitable, or preventable? Some historians argue that the urban poor were doomed by overcrowding, pollution and neglect. Others believe more could have been done. Better sanitation, cleaner water, access to real medicine. But the truth lies somewhere in between. People didn't die because they were poor. They died because society accepted that poverty came with casualties. There's a name for it now, structural violence. Back then it was just life. You lie down with the others, the room colder than usual. You pull the blanket up to your chin and close your eyes, but sleep doesn't come easy. Every creak sounds like a whisper, every cough like an echo. And somewhere in the night a door creaks open, then closes. Saturday night rolls in with a kind of anticipation you can feel in your bones. It doesn't come quietly. It stumbles, crashes, sings off key and smells like burnt onions and spilled ale. You can already tell it's different from the rest of the week. The city seems to exhale just a little. Not in relief exactly, but in resignation. Saturday night in the slums is what happens when people run out of options and decide to dance in the wreckage anyway. You're on the move tonight, walking through the narrow lanes just as lamps are being lit, or rather, lit again, after sputtering out from neglect. The air is thick with smoke, steam, and the particular mix of odours that can only come from thousands of people cooking, cleaning and drinking all at once. Fried fish, damp wood, coal smoke, sweat, gin. It's a perfume you won't forget. The market streets are still alive, though most vendors are selling the end-of-week scraps. A man with a wooden leg is frying something that might be potatoes, or might not. He's got a chalkboard sign beside him that says supper for a farthing, and people are lining up. You see a woman haggling with a baker over a sack of crumbs. Not loaves, just crumbs. For stuffing, she says, though you doubt there's any roast to stuff. Children run past you, shouting, some with sticks, one with a hoop made from a bent piece of wire. They're feral with freedom. On Saturdays, even the factory bells go quiet. No one has to rise at 4 in the morning tomorrow, so kids are allowed to be loud, to be fast, to be small and chaotic. For a few hours at least. You round the corner into the heart of the court and it's transformed. What was grim and grey by daylight is now lit by a patchwork of candles, oil lamps, and open windows spilling firelight into the street. Someone's rigged up a fiddle player on a crate. He's young, missing a front tooth, and absolutely murdering the melody. But no one seems to mind. People are clapping, stamping their feet on the cobblestones. A few are dancing, badly, joyfully. It's not exactly a party. More like a temporary suspension of despair. You spot Agnes, leaning against a doorway, arms folded. Her face is unreadable. She's watching the children dance with a gaze that's part mother, part mathematician. She's calculating how long this will last, how much bread is left, how many hours until everything tightens again. You make your way to the edge of the gathering, careful not to trip over the drunk man already passed out near the gutter. He's snoring like a broken bellows, one boot off, one sock missing. A dog is sniffing him, but eventually decides against any further interest. Across the way, a group of factory workers is playing a loud game of pitch and toss with bottle caps. Coins clink. Arguments spark and settle like sparks. There's an energy in the air now, thick and buzzing. Saturday night is when things come loose, when rules bend and emotions flare. It's when laughter gets too loud and fights break out over nothing at all. You can feel the tension building in the shadows between doorways. It's in the glint of a bottle lifted too fast, in the shout that lasts a second too long. A couple stumbles past you, arms locked, faces flushed. The man's got a black eye forming, but he's grinning like he's won a prize. The woman is laughing so hard she can barely breathe. They look at each other like the world's about to end, and they couldn't care less. You know it's coming, it always does. The first punch flies near the corner by the old well. Two boys, maybe 16, maybe younger, are yelling at each other about a borrowed coat or a stolen shilling, or a girl who looked at one the wrong way. There's a brief scuffle, then a fist, then another. The crowd parts just enough to give them room. No one stops it. They watch. It burns out quickly, as these things often do. One boy lands a lucky hit. The other stumbles back and it's over. Blood on the lip. Pride more bruised than bones. Someone hands over a rag. The boy presses it to his face and limps away. A few people clap, not out of cruelty but out of habit. The fiddle starts again. Just like that, the night rolls forward. Your strange little fact for the evening. Public fighting wasn't just common in the slums. It was, in some ways, expected. A bizarre kind of community pressure existed to defend honour, even over small slights. Fights weren't always personal. Sometimes they were just a way to vent the steam before it built too high. A kind of human safety valve. The real tragedy was when fists turned into knives. But most nights, people walked away with nothing more than stories and swelling. Later you see Mary sitting near the dancing children, hands in her lap, watching. A boy her age offers her his hand, but she shakes her head. She's not in the mood. You don't blame her. Her world changed too fast this week, and no song can make it right. You move through the crowd and find yourself drawn into a conversation with a man holding a cracked mug full of something dark and suspiciously flammable. He introduces himself as Jack, and he tells you 3 things without being asked. He's 39, he used to have all his teeth, and he once wrestled a goose in a tavern and won. You nod. He seems proud. Jack then goes on a long rant about his boss at the mill, who docked his pay for showing up late. Never mind that the tram horse collapsed and had to be carried off the road. I walked the last mile, Jack says indignantly, and still got told off like I was late for tea. You listen. Everyone does. Jack's story turns into a broader one about injustice, then into a joke about constables with bad breath, then into a slurred song that may or may not be about Queen Victoria. You don't catch all the words. This is Saturday. This is what relief looks like when you live in a cage made of bricks and rent and soot. Not joy exactly, but defiance. A refusal to let the weekend on a whisper. Here's your scholarly debate for the evening. Did slum communities use these Saturday nights to maintain morale, or to forget reality? Some argue that these rituals, music, dance, drinking, kept people human, gave them connection and culture. Others say they were distractions that prevented revolt, that the rhythm of 6 days' suffering followed by 1 night of release was a trap disguised as tradition. But either way, you can't deny the pulse of it, the power, the sheer stubborn life of it. You leave the court just as the music begins to falter. The fiddle player is losing momentum, and the candles are burning low. The first fights have turned into stumbles. Somewhere, a baby cries. Someone sings off key. The night is winding down, folding in on itself like a worn coat. Back inside, the house is quiet. Agnes is asleep sitting up, Nellie curled beside her. Mary lies with her back to the room, one arm over her eyes. The fire has burned down to embers. You lie down, boots still on, and close your eyes. Your ears are still ringing with the music, the shouting, the laughter. For now, the city is resting. Tomorrow it begins again. The sun doesn't so much rise as it seeps into the cracks between the soot-stained buildings, sluggish and half-hearted. It's Monday again, and while the men and older boys shuffle off toward the mills and brickyards, you're sticking closer to home today, following someone you've seen in flashes, glimpses, and weary glances. Her name is Bess, and she's a laundress, a mother of 5, and the kind of woman whose spine is made of iron wrapped in threadbare muslin. You first see her near the communal pump, already ankle-deep in water and soap suds, sleeves rolled up past her elbows. It's not even 7. Around her are half a dozen other women, talking in low voices, scrubbing and wringing until their hands go numb. The air is filled with steam, gossip, and the sharp slap of wet linen against stone. This is their workplace, their confession booth, their battlefield. Bess gives you a brief nod, acknowledgement, not invitation, and goes back to her work. You watch as she scrubs a pair of trousers so vigorously it's a miracle they hold together. Her knuckles are red, the skin across her hands cracked and swollen. Still, she doesn't slow down. There's a baby strapped to her back with a piece of faded shawl, and every few minutes she pauses to bounce him gently, pat his side, and then resumes her assault on a shirt that probably hasn't been truly white since the day it was sewn. You notice her movements aren't rushed but practiced, efficient. Every step has purpose. Soap here, rinse there, wring out with one hand while keeping the child from slipping. It's choreography, and she's been dancing it for years. Laundry isn't glamorous work. It's not even considered proper employment by the city's standards, but it pays, if barely. Women like Bess take in washing from wealthier households across town, carrying loads to and from with aching backs and stiff arms. Some walk miles for a penny's worth of dirty collars and underthings. Others scrub for neighbours who are too sick or old to do it themselves. No contracts, no guarantees, just water, soap and willpower. Back at her home, a single room at the top of a staircase that lists slightly to one side. Bess boils a pot of water on a fire that's barely clinging to life. Her older daughter, Lottie, is peeling potatoes with a paring knife so blunt it's more of a suggestion than a blade. The youngest, Ellie, sits on the floor gnawing on a wooden spoon. Henry's off today, Bess says, referring to her husband, with a tone that suggests this isn't necessarily a good thing. Got drunk on his wages Saturday. Spent Sunday sleeping it off and swearing it'd never happen again, she snorts softly. He's out now, looking for work to cover what he drank. Won't find it, but he'll try. He always tries. That's the problem. You don't ask more. You don't need to. Women like Bess don't get afternoons. They don't get sick days. After laundry, there's food to scrape together, children to keep alive, wounds to tend, physical and otherwise. She stitches a torn sleeve while balancing a baby on one hip and stirring the pot with the other hand. Her eyes never stop moving, scanning the room like a commander surveying the battlefield. She tells you how her neighbour lost a child last winter, not to illness, but to hunger. The girl simply stopped eating. They thought she was being picky, but it turned out she was giving her portions to her little brother. Tried to be the brave one, Bess says, and her voice cracks just slightly. And the brave ones always go first. The afternoon brings a moment of calm. A neighbour stops by with some extra carrots, traded for mending work. The girls start sweeping, humming as they push dust from corner to corner. Bess finally sits, her whole body sagging like the structure around her. She pulls off her boots, wet, cracked and more whole than sole, and rubs her feet slowly, wincing. You ask if she ever rests. She shrugs. I sleep when the baby does, or when I'm too tired to care. Then she glances at you, her mouth pulling into something like a smile. But I don't complain. It's worse for some, and I've still got all 5 for now. That for now sits heavy in the room. Here's your quirky little fact for the day. In Victorian Manchester, there were entire manuals written for laundresses, filled with tips like how to stretch soap with stale beer, or how to whiten collars using brick dust. These weren't just household guides, they were survival kits in disguise. One even recommended singing while wringing out sheets to lighten the spirit. You imagine Bess singing. You imagine her rolling her eyes at the suggestion. And the scholarly debate? It hovers around gender and labour, specifically whether women's unpaid or informal work was more vital to the city than the factory output. Historians still argue whether these women were part of the workforce or just existing alongside it. But anyone who's followed Bess for a day knows the truth. If the factory workers built the city, the women kept it from falling apart. Evening comes, and Henry returns. His walk slow, his face slack. He's got nothing to show for his effort, just the sag of another day with no work. Bess doesn't yell. She doesn't sigh. She just hands him a bowl of stew and goes back to sewing. Later, you sit near the fire with the family. The children have eaten. The baby is asleep in a drawer lined with blankets. Henry leans against the wall, already half dozing. Bess picks up another shirt, threads her needle and begins again. You ask her if she ever thinks of leaving the city. She doesn't look up. Where would I go? The dirt's the same everywhere, and that's the truth of it. There's no escape, no fresh start, just the next wash, the next scrape, the next day. The fire flickers low. The girls curl together under a shared blanket. Bess keeps sewing long after you stop watching. The thread doesn't break, neither does she. The soot is falling again, soft as ash, silent as snow. You can't see it at first, not really. It's only when you run your fingers along the window frame or brush your sleeve across the edge of a stair rail that you realise the air itself has texture, a faint grit, a fine dusting of industry's leftovers. It's everywhere, in your lungs, in your teeth, in your thoughts. Even when it rains, which it often does, it just turns the soot into streaks on every surface. Soot that moves like water, sticks like glue. You step outside, rubbing your hands together for warmth, and watch the clouds roll in. The sky's the same colour as the buildings, bruised grey, and there's no telling where one ends and the other begins. A nearby chimney breathes out thick black smoke like it's sighing. Somewhere in the distance a whistle screams, then disappears into the damp. Agnes joins you in the alley, adjusting her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Smog's worse today, she mutters, scanning the sky like it's personally offended her. We'll be coughing blood before supper. She's not joking. Not really. You start walking toward the edge of town, if there is such a thing. The line between city and not city in Manchester is more a concept than a boundary. You pass more courts, more alleyways, more half-finished buildings, all draped in the same uniform layer of grime. Washing lines droop with clothes that were white only in memory. Children cough in the shadows, the sound bouncing off the bricks like they're playing a cruel game of echo. The path takes you toward the factories, the big ones. They tower like fortresses over the slums, red brick, soot-streaked, and always moaning with machinery. You've heard them before, but now you feel them. The rumble under your feet, the clank of gears turning, the low, ever-present hum of effort. You get closer and notice something odd. Everything is wet. The soot isn't just floating, it's sticking. The buildings glisten with a thin coat of oily damp. It gets on your skin, your hair, the back of your throat. You see women with cloths wrapped around their mouths, men coughing into handkerchiefs, children squinting through red-rimmed eyes. Everyone looks like they haven't slept, and honestly, most of them haven't. It's hard to sleep when it feels like your lungs are being sandpapered from the inside out. You pass a man standing on a corner, coughing into a rag so violently he doubles over. When he lifts his head, there's blood. He wipes it away like he's brushing off crumbs. No panic, no fuss, just routine. You catch up with a man named Reuben, one of the few chimney sweeps still working even though he's too tall for the job. Started when I was 8, he says, grinning through soot-streaked teeth. Could slide down a flue faster than a rain gutter, he hacks a laugh. Now I just fix the ones the lads get stuck in. He shows you his hands, burned, cracked, calloused beyond belief. His skin is permanently blackened, no matter how often he scrubs. His eyes water constantly. Doctor says my lungs are turning to cinders, he says, matter-of-factly. Told me to find new work. Told him to find me new lungs. You don't laugh. He does. Further along, you meet a woman named Ruth who's lived in the same one-room flat near the dye works for 20 years. She's lost 4 children, 2 to illness, 1 to fire, 1 just disappeared, Walked out one foggy morning and never came back. She doesn't cry when she tells you. She just folds laundry with perfect corners, her fingers stiff from arthritis that set in when she was 30. Everything's stained, she says, holding up a sheet that was once cream but now leans yellow-brown. Even the sky. And she's not wrong. Manchester's smog is famous, or infamous depending on who you ask. It's not just smoke, it's chemical. Coal, mostly, but also sulphur, dye residue, steam, ash, and microscopic bits of cotton fibre. Factories don't just fill orders, they fill the air, and no one's been able to breathe properly since. Here's your quirky fact for the day. The term pea super wasn't invented by a poet. It was used by Mancunians to describe the dense yellow-green fog that would roll through the streets like something alive. Visibility dropped to nothing. People walked into walls. Some swore they could taste metal. One fog in the 1870s was so bad a cow fell into a canal because it couldn't see the edge. You walk back through the courts, and everywhere the city seems tired. The bricks sag under the weight of soot. The windows blink slowly, dim behind layers of grime. Even the dogs look resigned. Inside the house, the smell of damp hangs heavy. Agnes is hanging clothes near the fire, though the air's too moist for anything to dry properly. Mary is picking soot flakes off the windowsill. Nellie's nose is bleeding. Again. No one reacts. Agnes just gives her a scrap of cloth and tells her to pinch it. You ask if it ever clears. Agnes gives you a look. You ever seen it clear? You shake your head. There's your answer. You eat dinner in silence, stew so bland it might be broth, maybe with a hint of cabbage. You're not sure. The fire pops, sending a puff of smoke into the room, and everyone coughs in chorus. Mary smiles weakly. Better than the air outside, she says. There's a scholarly debate, of course there is, about how much Manchester's infamous smog contributed to long-term health decline. Some argue it accelerated industrial progress and was a necessary evil. Others point to death rates, hospital records, and the sheer volume of blackened lungs. They say the city's air was a weapon disguised as weather, a silent killer in a respectable top hat. You fall asleep with that taste in your mouth again, that faint, coppery, burnt metal flavour that won't leave, no matter how many times you rinse your mouth. It settles on your tongue, in your throat, in your dreams, and somewhere a chimney moans, a street lamp flickers, a cough breaks the silence, and the soot keeps falling. Night is falling fast when you find yourself standing outside a low, narrow doorway tucked between two soot-stained buildings. The sign above it is hand-painted, the letters uneven and faded. Lodging house, 4p a night. It's not your usual corner of the slum, but tonight you're not headed home to Agnes's hearth. Tonight you're staying in a 4p coffin. That's what they call it. Half joke, half warning. The name has less to do with actual death and more with the room's shape and spirit. Long rows of wooden bunks stacked like crates, with barely enough space for the living, let alone the dead. You duck through the door and are immediately hit by a wave of heat, sweat, and something far more organic. The air's wet with breath and boiled socks. You instantly regret inhaling. A wiry man with a crooked smile and exactly 3 teeth greets you from behind a makeshift counter. "One night?" he asks. You nod and hand over the coin. He slides you a key, though it doesn't open anything, and waves vaguely toward a door behind him. Your bottom left. Watch for fleas. You pass through a curtain instead of a door, stepping into a low-ceilinged room buzzing with sound. Not conversation, though there's some of that, but the background murmur of humanity. Coughing, snoring, muttering, wheezing. The room is filled with wooden beds lined side by side in tight formation, most no wider than a coffin and barely long enough for a grown man to stretch out. Some are curtained, most are not. You make your way to your spot, bottom left, as promised. It's a narrow bunk with straw stuffing and a blanket so thin you can see the wood through it. You sit slowly, trying not to brush against anything you can't identify. The man next to you gives a nod, then goes back to plucking something out of his beard with a practiced hand. The floor creaks under every footstep. Above you, a man coughs wetly and spits into a tin cup nailed to the bunk frame. A woman somewhere across the room is muttering to herself, rocking gently. Someone nearby breaks wind, loudly and without shame. You adjust your coat and settle in. Welcome to the lodging house. For many, this is as close as they'll get to a roof. The workhouses are worse, rigid, punishing, filled with rules and shame. The lodging houses offer no comfort, no luxury, but they don't judge. You pay your coin, you get your bed. It might be infested. The person next to you might be dying. But no one asks questions. The man across from you is carving something into a piece of bone with a tiny knife. A bird, maybe, or a fish. He doesn't speak, but every now and then he hums, tuneless, low. Beside him, a boy not more than 15 is curled up in a fetal position, shoes still on, arms wrapped around a ragged satchel like it's the last treasure he owns. A woman walks past, hair tied back in a handkerchief, her dress crusted with something that looks suspiciously like soap and blood. She glances at you but doesn't stop, just finds an empty bed and sits, staring into nothing. You strike up a conversation with the man next to you. Alf, he says. Worked as a navvy once, building railway lines. Broke his leg and couldn't keep up. Now he sells firewood when he can, sleeps here when he has the coin, and in stairwells when he doesn't. It's warm at least, he says, shrugging, and you only get robbed if you snore too loud. You ask how long he's been here. Long enough, he replies, scratching at his scalp. You from round here? You hesitate, then nod. Don't matter, he says. Here, we're all from somewhere we don't talk about. He tells you stories, half-truths maybe, but good ones. About a man who slept here every night for 10 years and claimed he was once a baron. About the girl who gave birth in the bunk across the way without making a sound. About the rats in the wall that everyone swears are growing smarter by the week. Here's your quirky fact. In some of Manchester's rougher lodging houses, beds were rented in shifts. If you worked nights, you slept during the day, and vice versa. Some beds were never truly empty, just passed from one warm body to another, like a handshake of exhaustion. The term hot bedding was literal. It wasn't uncommon for a bed to have 3 or 4 occupants within a single 24-hour stretch. You try to sleep, but the sounds keep you awake. Not just the noise of people, but the creaking, the whispering, the occasional thud. Someone nearby cries out in their sleep. Someone else starts a low chant. A prayer, maybe. You close your eyes anyway. It's later when a fight breaks out. Not a big one. Just a scuffle over space or blankets or snoring. 2 men wrestle briefly in the aisle before one is shoved into a bunk and the other walks off swearing. No one intervenes. The owner peeks in from the front room, shrugs, and disappears. The scholarly debate? Whether lodging houses were lifelines or liabilities. Reformers wanted them regulated. Cleaner, safer, less chaotic. But regulation meant cost, and owners balked. The working poor needed them, and cities couldn't afford to replace them. So they limped along, overcrowded, dirty, vital. A testament to what happens when survival becomes business. You finally drift off in the small hours, just as the cough above you quiets and the boy across the way begins to snore. Sleep is shallow and filled with flickering images. Bricks, bones, smoke. You dream of beds stacked like crates on a ship going nowhere. At dawn a bell clangs. Everyone stirs. It's time to leave. That's the rule. Pay for the night. Be gone by morning. You step into the alley, breath steaming, eyes gritty. The city looks different in the early light. Raw, exposed. A few other lodgers mill around, stretching, coughing, rubbing sleep from their faces. You look back at the doorway, at the words above it. 4 pence a night. Not bad, for a coffin with no nails. The sun is barely up when you hear them. Children's voices, high and sharp, cutting through the alleyway like songbirds made of bricks and elbows. You follow the sound, rounding a corner just as a half-dozen kids dart past you in a blur of bare feet, patched trousers and wild laughter. One of them's holding something suspiciously round and red. An apple, maybe, or a tomato lifted from a vendor's cart. Either way, they're not sticking around to explain. These are the street kids of Victorian Manchester. Ragamuffins, guttersnipes, urchins, pickers. No proper names, not really, though each one's got a nickname sharp enough to cut glass. There's Titch, Squib, Spider, Lanky, and a girl everyone calls Cricket because she hops when she walks, the result of a twisted ankle that never healed right. You trail them through the waking slum, past lines of laundry already collecting soot, through puddles that reflect the dull grey sky like broken mirrors. The kids move like water, flowing through tight gaps between buildings, ducking under carts, vaulting over crates. Their energy seems endless, like someone wound them up in the night and forgot to let them stop. They're not on the run, not really, not yet. This is just how they move. You find them again near the gasworks, gathered around a fire built in a metal drum. A few hold sticks with bread crusts skewered on the ends, warming them like fine delicacies. Cricket offers you a bite. It's hard as stone but smells faintly of yeast and smoke. You chew anyway, she grins. Breakfast of kings, she says proudly. None of them go to school. Some have homes, if you stretch the definition, but most sleep where they fall, under carts, in doorways, inside crates, wrapped in stolen rags and hope. Their parents are gone, or working too much to notice, or dead. The street is their parent now, strict, stingy, but at least predictable. Spider, the self-declared leader, shows you his latest find, a pocket watch with no hands. Still worth something, he says, slipping it into his coat lining, which is less clothing and more pocket. You don't ask where he got it. You don't want to know. You walk with them as they make their rounds, not to school or a job, but to the city itself. They know every shortcut, every vendor with a loose grip, every corner where the bread carts linger just a moment too long. One of them, lanky, is a master at pretending to trip. It's his job to create a distraction while the others dart in and lift a crust or two. It's not exactly theft, not in their eyes. It's survival. The city's got plenty of food. It's just in the wrong hands. Here's your quirky fact. In mid-19th century Manchester, there were estimated to be thousands of homeless or semi-homeless children living on the streets. Some sold matches or newspapers, some begged, others did worse. The phrase street Arab was even used by reformers to describe them, as if they were some exotic species rather than just local kids with nowhere to go. At one point, someone tried to round them all up. A man named Thomas John Barnardo, yes, that Barnardo, opened homes, offered education, tried to teach them to comb their hair and stop picking pockets. But not every child could be saved, and not every child wanted to be. The street teaches a kind of pride, a kind of freedom, and some preferred that to rules and sermons. You end up in a churchyard, mostly empty during the day, save for a few loitering pigeons and a boy named Titch, playing keep away with a dead crow. Don't ask. The others join in, shrieking with laughter, chasing each other around gravestones while an old priest watches from a bench, sipping tea, like this is just another part of his sermon. You sit beside him. He doesn't look at you, just mutters, "They're wild things. Not wicked. Just no place to put the fire, that's all." He's not wrong. Later, as the afternoon light starts to fade, you see the change come over them. The laughter fades. The darting slows. They start looking for corners, dry steps, sheltered stoops, places to huddle. Because while the street is a playground by day, it's something colder at night. The wind bites harder, the shadows stretch longer, they separate slowly like birds scattering at dusk. Cricket pulls a bit of cloth from her coat and wraps it tighter around her middle. She doesn't have a blanket, just that. Her eyes are still bright though, still fierce. She points to you. "You sleeping indoors?" she asks, not jealously, just curious. You nod. "Tell your walls to be kind." She grins, then hops away into the fog. Back home, Mary asks where you've been. You say out with the kids, and she just nods. She knows the type. She was nearly one of them before Agnes dragged her back into the fold. Agnes listens without comment. Just keeps stitching. Her needlework's slower than usual tonight. There's a scholarly debate, of course. Always is. Some historians argue that street children were victims, pure and simple, abandoned by a society too focused on profit to protect its most vulnerable. Others say the children were agents in their own lives, carving out autonomy in a system that gave them nothing. Maybe it's both. Maybe it has to be. You lie down on the cold floor, pulling your coat tighter, thinking of Cricket curled in a stairwell, of Spider selling a watch with no hands, of Titch and his crow, of a dozen other names you'll never know. The city sleeps, but not deeply, never deeply. You hear a whistle in the distance, then a shout, then silence again. It begins with a voice, not angry, not broken, but loud, strangely clean and sharp against the muffled sounds of the slum. You hear it echoing off the walls of the alley before you see its owner. "Repent!" it cries, with the bright clarity of someone who believes they're being listened to. "Turn from sin and be redeemed." You turn the corner and there he is, thin, wiry, eyes alight with something that might be faith or fever, depending on how cynical you're feeling. He's standing on an old crate, a Bible in one hand, the other raised like he's trying to keep the entire neighbourhood from sliding off into hell. He's dressed plainly but clean, which makes him stand out more than if he were wrapped in gold. You can tell from the calluses on his hands he's not a stranger to work, but today he's preaching, not pounding nails. A small crowd has gathered, not exactly rapt, but not hostile either. Some lean against the walls, arms folded, watching like it's theatre. A few hecklers toss out sarcastic amens. One woman mutters that she's heard better sermons from her drunk uncle. But no one throws anything, not yet. The preacher doesn't flinch. There is salvation for all, he calls, gesturing at the boarded windows, the crumbling chimneys, the soot-caked faces. Even here. Especially here. The Lord sees you in your suffering, but he also sees your sins. You can almost hear the collective eye roll. Still, there's something about him. Maybe it's the way his voice cuts through the grime like a blade. Maybe it's the way he makes the sky seem a little higher, the buildings a little less like coffins. You find yourself stepping closer, despite the smell of boiled cabbage wafting from a nearby doorway. Then he switches gears. Drink is the devil's whisper, he bellows, pointing now not toward heaven, but directly at the nearest tavern sign, swinging lazily in the wind. It steals your money, your dignity, your soul. It poisons men and turns them into beasts. I have seen it. I have lived it. That gets a reaction. Someone in the crowd lets out a loud, mocking hiccup. Another shouts, "Let a man have his pint, preacher." A few laugh, but not unkindly. They've heard this before and they'll hear it again. Still, they don't leave. The preacher continues undeterred, like he's carved from conviction. He shares a story. His story, apparently. Born in Manchester, lost his father to gin. Mother died in the workhouse. He himself nearly drowned in the Irwell with a bottle in his pocket. "But the Lord pulled me from the mud," he says, raising a fist, "and gave me breath again." You can't help but wonder how much of it's true. Behind him, a young woman begins handing out paper tracts to the crowd. You take one, Drink and the Devil, the twin chains of poverty. It features a crude illustration of a man drowning in a mug, arms flailing, a child crying at the rim. Dramatic, yes, but not inaccurate. Here's your quirky fact for the evening. In the mid-19th century, public preaching in places like Manchester wasn't just common. It was a competitive sport. Dozens of different sects would claim corners on the same street, each trying to shout louder than the next. Baptists, Methodists, Quakers, Salvationists, all vying for ears, hearts, and hopefully donations. The preacher now pulls out a flask, not to drink from, but to hurl dramatically onto the cobblestones. It shatters. "That was my last drink," he says, 5 years ago, and I've been clean ever since." This time, there's a smattering of real applause. Someone whistles. A child claps, mostly because the glass breaking was exciting. Agnes arrives beside you, arms folded, eyebrows raised. "He any good?" she asks. You shrug. "Loud." She huffs. "Wish loudness could mend my roof." She doesn't stay long. A few more people wander off as the sermon winds down, but some linger. A couple of women approach the preacher to speak softly, perhaps ask for help, or prayer, or just to be heard. He leans down, listens patiently, hands resting on the weather-worn cover of his Bible. Later you see him at the soup mission, not preaching now, serving, ladling out broth, cutting bread, giving quiet nods to the same people who ignored him hours ago. He doesn't mention sin, doesn't quote scripture, just offers food with a hand that doesn't shake. Mary's there too, helping fold linen napkins that have been donated by some well-meaning church in a richer part of town. She watches the preacher for a moment, then turns to you and says, "He lost a sister to gin. She was 13. You glance at the preacher. His shoulders sag just slightly now, his voice quiet as he speaks to an old man missing most of his teeth. You wonder if he still believes everything he says, or if some of it is just to keep going. Here's the ongoing scholarly debate. Were these street preachers part of the problem or part of the solution? Some argue they shifted blame for poverty onto the poor themselves. If you were more virtuous, you wouldn't suffer. Others say they brought hope, community, even structure, that they were the only ones who noticed when someone disappeared, who remembered names, who showed up when no one else did. You walk home that evening past the spot where the sermon took place. The broken glass has already been swept away. The tavern sign still swings, the door open, laughter spilling out. Inside, two men argue about football, or what passed for football in 1850. A woman leans against the bar, eyes glazed, drink in hand. And outside, a child hunches on the steps of a church, holding a tract in one hand, gnawing on the corner like it might be edible. Back in the house, Agnes is knitting something, a sock maybe. Mary reads by candlelight. Nellie is asleep, wrapped around her rag doll like it's made of gold. You lie on the floor, the tract still in your pocket. You read it again by flickering light. The message is clear. Redemption is possible, but it'll cost you everything. The air is quiet tonight. No singing, no shouting, just the steady creak of the wind through the slats. And somewhere, someone preaches to a street that never stops listening, whether it wants to or not. It starts with a man holding a notebook. Not the usual scrap paper used for grocery lists or rent tallies, but a proper bound notebook, with pages clean enough to be intimidating. He stands at the edge of the court, neat in appearance but not so polished as to attract suspicion. His coat is worn but brushed, his shoes still too shiny. No soot under the nails, no twitchy eyes from too much gin, and he's not here for bread or shelter. He's watching and writing. You lean against a post, pretending not to notice him while very much noticing him. He sketches quick notes with a short pencil, glancing up every few seconds. You watch his eyes track a woman carrying a coal bucket, a boy limping with a twisted boot, a dog rooting through ash for bone fragments. His expression isn't cruel, but it's not quite empathetic either. It's clinical, the kind that says, I need to get this down, and I need to get it right, but I'm not part of it. You sidle closer. He notices but doesn't flinch. Journalist, you ask? He smiles politely. No, observer. You glance at the notebook. Looks like judgment. He pauses, then flips the cover to show you the title scrawled at the top. Notes for the Commission on Urban Living Conditions, Manchester, 1855. That gets your attention. Turns out he's one of the Watchers, a growing group of social reformers, health inspectors, early sociologists and philanthropists' assistants who've started drifting through the city's poorest quarters. They're part of an unofficial campaign to document the slums, to catalogue the misery. Not necessarily to fix it, though some think that's the goal, but to make it known, undeniable, unignorable. His name's Mr. Fielding, and he's from London. That explains the shoes. He asks questions, all polite, all invasive. How many share your room? Do you boil your water? Has anyone in your family suffered from rickets? What does your husband drink per week? What does he earn? You answer carefully, or rather you don't. You redirect. You mention Agnes, the kids, the mill down the road. He writes everything down. I'm not here to shame anyone, he says. We want to make conditions visible. But to whom? You walk with him a while as he makes his rounds. He pauses at the corner where the children play, noting that their faces are thin, their clothes thinner. He sketches a quick outline of the court itself, marking the open sewer at the centre. You realise with some surprise that he's a good artist, his drawings fast but accurate. He adds a little girl standing barefoot in the filth. That's Nellie, you say. He looks surprised. You know her? She lives here. Fielding hesitates. I see. It's not cruel, but it lands like a stone. Later you pass Mrs. Platt. She's muttering under her breath and glaring at Fielding's back. Last time one of them came by, we got nothing but a sermon and a 3-page article in The Guardian. Didn't clean the court, didn't fix the drains, just made us all sound like rats. But here's your curious historical footnote. These observers, especially those tied to early reform movements, did end up changing the landscape of British cities. Their pamphlets and surveys shocked middle-class readers. They introduced phrases like the dangerous poor and moral degeneracy, which weren't always helpful but at least got attention. Maps were drawn, reports published, sanitation acts proposed. But it came with a cost. People were transformed into data, homes into case studies, children into statistics. There's an ongoing debate about whether this helped or hurt. Did it lead to reform, or did it flatten real people into caricatures? Some say it opened the door to better housing, cleaner streets, and public health infrastructure. Others argue it reinforced a sense of otherness, a belief that the poor were not just poor but inherently broken. You see Fielding again later speaking with Agnes. She's stiff, polite, answering his questions like she's reading off a chalkboard. When he asks about Sam, she doesn't flinch. He passed 3 weeks ago. Fielding notes it with a slow, respectful nod. Was it fever? He asks. No, she says. It was poverty. He writes that down too. After he leaves, you sit with Agnes by the hearth. She's got the kettle on, though there's nothing in it. It's just the sound she wants, something familiar, something boiling. Mary's curled on the floor, sketching in the dirt with a bit of chalk. Do you think they'll change anything? Agnes asks quietly. You don't answer. Neither does the kettle. Night comes and the streetlights flicker on, dim orbs swallowed quickly by fog. You hear someone coughing down in the alley. the sound bouncing like a stone against the bricks. Somewhere a baby cries. Somewhere else a man shouts. You look through the window and see Fielding's figure vanish into the distance, notebook tucked under his arm, head bowed against the cold. You wonder what he'll write about you. The sound wakes you first, muffled, frantic, scraping against the walls like rats in a barrel. It's still dark, but not the usual peaceful, coal-soft darkness. This one's alive, panicked. Then comes the shouting. A man's voice, raw and urgent. Then a woman's, high-pitched and ragged. By the time you're on your feet, everyone else in the house is already moving. Agnes throws a shawl around her shoulders. Mary lights the stub of a candle. Nellie sits up, eyes wide, clutching her doll with both hands like it might fly away. You step outside into the alley and are nearly knocked sideways by the sheer volume of noise. Doors are swinging open. Neighbours are pouring out in their nightclothes. The air is thick with a strange mix of smoke and steam, and you realise with a jolt what you're smelling. Fire. Not from a hearth or a kettle left on too long. This is real. This is bad. Across the court, flames are licking the upper windows of a 3-story lodging house, dancing like they've waited years to escape. They're already red and violent. Not the beginning flickers of mischief, but the full-throated roar of destruction. The front steps are blackening. The shutters are glowing, and people are still inside. Chaos unfolds in seconds. A man stumbles out, dragging a child by the arm. Someone tosses a bucket of water that sizzles uselessly against a burning doorframe. Screaming. Real, throat-tearing screaming slices through the thick air. Someone tries to rush in, but the doorway's already collapsing inward. Timbers snapping like bones. There's no fire brigade. Not here. Not yet. You're at least a quarter-mile from the station, and even if someone ran by the time help arrives, there'll be little left to rescue. So the slum does what it always does. It saves itself or burns trying. You see Alf, the firewood seller from the lodging house, rushing toward the flames with a blanket over his head. You shout for him to stop, but he ignores you, vanishing into the smoke. 2 heartbeats later, he stumbles back out empty-handed, coughing so hard you think his lungs might come loose. His blanket is smouldering. His face is streaked with soot and tears. Too late, he gasps. Top floor's gone. You don't ask who was up there. You don't want to know. Agnes stands beside you, silent, watching as the building gives in to the fire inch by inch. The crowd is backed up, huddled at the edges of the court. Some are praying, others just staring. And still, no brigade, no hoses, no officials, no bells. Here's your strange little footnote. Victorian Manchester's fire response was wildly uneven. Poorer areas often went without proper hydrants. Volunteer brigades would sometimes refuse to attend if the owner couldn't guarantee payment. And once, famously, 2 rival crews fought each other instead of the blaze, because the building in question owed them both. Tonight there is no fighting, just silence and smoke. The building groans once, low and deep, almost like a sigh, and then it collapses inward, sending a plume of sparks into the air like fireflies drunk on rage. The crowd flinches. Someone sobs. A child cries out for her mother, and a stranger scoops her up and holds her close. Later, when the embers finally begin to cool, a few brave souls inch forward. There's nothing to salvage. The bones of the building remain, jagged and red. The rest is black paste, timber and glass and shoes and memories. You recognize a tin cup near the rubble. You saw it just yesterday, hanging from a bunk. Mary wraps an arm around Nellie, shielding her eyes from the scene. Agnes stands so still, it's like she's part of the wreckage. You ask her, how did it start? Candles, she says, her voice flat. Probably fell, or caught a curtain. Didn't they have a bucket line? They don't even have bedsheets most days. You find a seat on a cracked stone step and watch the sun begin to rise, thin and wan against the haze. People begin drifting home, quietly. No more talk, no more shouting. Just a slow return to what passes for normal. Back inside, Agnes puts on a kettle again. More ritual than necessity. She doesn't speak. Mary curls in the corner, holding Nellie close. You sit by the window, watching a dog sniff at the edges of the ash pile. The scholars like to argue about slum fires, whether they were inevitable tragedies or avoidable consequences. Some point to building materials, cheap wood, coal stoves, paraffin lamps. Others blame overcrowding, lack of regulations, the city's refusal to invest in anything that wouldn't produce profit. Everyone agrees that when the fires came, they came fast, and they didn't care whose name was on the rent roll. You read once that for every fire in the slums, 2 more would start in people's hearts. Not the good kind, the kind that burns and never finds a place to go. Agnes finally speaks. They'll build another. Maybe worse. You nod. No one will write about it, she adds. Maybe Fielding will, she snorts. Fielding will draw a pretty picture and call it progress. That night the city is still again. Too still. Even the usual shouting in the tavern has gone quiet, as if the fire reached in and stole everyone's voice. You lie awake longer than usual, listening to the soft sounds of breathing around you. You think of Alf, of the tin cup, of who else didn't come out, and you wonder, not for the first time, why everything in this city feels like it's made of tinder and hope, and why the hope always burns first. It rains the next morning, proper heavy rain, not the usual dribble that settles into your bones like a wet sigh. This rain feels angry, impatient, pounding the rooftops with a rhythm that demands attention. You wake to the sound of it drumming on the slates, leaking through the cracks, tapping insistently on every bucket, basin and bent tin cup someone's put out to catch it. The slums of Manchester have no mercy in dry weather, but in the wet they become something else entirely, soaked, sagging and slick with danger. Agnes is already awake, placing pans under the fresh leaks. There's one over the stove now, a new one by the window, and the familiar drip-drip near the hearth has picked up its tempo like it's rehearsing for an orchestra. Mary's trying to stop a draught with rags along the windowsill, her hands blue from the cold. Nellie, wrapped in 2 coats and a wool cap far too big for her, watches the water trail down the wall like it's part of some game she doesn't understand yet. You step outside, careful not to slip, and immediately feel your boots soak through. The cobblestones have become a riverbed, the alleyways narrow canals clogged with trash and soot and things best not named. The air smells of rotten rust and that particular stink of wet wool and coal dust that sticks to your throat like paste. People are moving slow, shoulders hunched, heads down, like they've given up arguing with the sky. Today you're following Tom, not one of the children, but a grown man, though the city hasn't been kind to his frame. Thin, stooped, with a limp from an old injury that never healed right. He used to work in a foundry, lost a toe in an accident, then the job, then the use of his left leg. Now he hauls goods when he can, delivers coal, sweeps out cellars for halfpennies, and spends the rest of the time trying to stay dry. You catch up with him near the warehouses where crates are being loaded onto carts bound for the station. The rain hasn't slowed the pace. Nothing does when money's involved. He shoulders a sack, grunts as he stumbles, then straightens and moves on. One of the warehouse managers barks at him for dripping water inside. No charge for the puddle, Tom mutters. Comes with the city. The manager doesn't laugh. He takes you on his route. Half delivery boy, half human mule. The streets are slick and shouting. Cartwheels splash mud onto the hem of your coat. Men curse at horses too tired to care. Somewhere, a woman is arguing with a constable under a broken umbrella. She's louder than the rain. Tom talks as he walks. About the weather, about the price of bread, about the mould growing up his walls. Had a loaf turn green overnight, he says. Swear it was white when I bought it. Now it's got fur. He tells you about his room. It's in a cellar, one of the infamous back-to-backs that were built without thought of drainage or air. The kind of place that doesn't get light even at noon. There's one window, if you can call it that, just above the ground line where you can watch people's boots pass by like ghosts. When it rains like this, the water comes in faster than it goes out. Sometimes I sleep in my chair, he says. It's higher than the bed. Don't wake up soaked. You reach his building, a brick block that looks like it was punched in the face and never recovered. Inside, the hallway smells like damp stone and bad dreams. You descend the steps carefully, past cracks in the wall big enough to fit your hand through. His room is everything you feared and more. Water pools on the floor in irregular shapes. The bed is raised on bricks. A kettle hangs above a fire that refuses to catch. There's a single chair, 3 books warped with moisture, and a pile of wet socks on a line that might once have been a washing rope. Tom sets the sack down and sighs. It ain't much, he says, but it's mine. Most days, that last part lands hard, because the landlords of Manchester don't care if your roof leaks, your floor floods, or your lungs rattle from the damp. They care if your rent is due, and when it is, they come knocking with heavy boots and short patience. Here's your historical tidbit for today. Studies from the time found that some cellar dwellings in Manchester were so consistently wet, mushrooms grew from the walls. Whole families lived underground, in rooms barely 5 feet tall with no ventilation and floors that turned to swamps every time the rain lasted more than a day. Cholera loved these places. So did rats. Tom shows you a bucket he uses to scoop out the water. If I'm lucky, it won't flood tonight. If I'm not, I'll float out by morning. You ask why he stays, he shrugs. Cheapest place that's still got a door. That night the rain keeps falling. The ceiling in your own room starts to drip in 2 new places. Agnes is stuffing a towel under the window. Mary shivers beside the fire, and Nellie curls under the blanket like a hermit crab hiding from the sea. You watch the candlelight dance on the wet walls and listen to the soft, rhythmic splashing of buckets being filled without permission. The air feels thinner when it's this damp, like the city's trying to crawl down your throat and live in your lungs. The scholars like to frame housing reform as a slow, steady battle. But for people like Tom, there is no patience in the rain. Just the now. Just the buckets. Just the knowledge that if you fall asleep without checking the drain, you might wake up swimming. At some point you think about that single window in his cellar, the one that sees only boots, and you wonder what it's like to never know the weather until it's already inside with you. Sleep comes, eventually shallow and interrupted. The rain still hammers, relentless, filling dreams with rushing water and broken floors. And somewhere across the alley, Tom is probably awake in his chair, watching the line between inside and outside blur with every drop. You wake to coughing, deep, racking, hollow. The kind of cough that sounds like something inside is trying to claw its way out. At first, you think it's Agnes. She's had a rough few nights since the fire, her voice hoarser than usual, but it's not her. It's coming from Mary. She's sitting up in bed, pale and slick with sweat. Her hair clings to her forehead, and her breath comes in quick, shallow gasps. Agnes is already by her side, holding a damp rag to her face, whispering soft things that don't mean much but still matter. Nellie stirs in the corner, not yet fully awake, sensing something's wrong but not knowing what. You cross the room, slow and cautious, and see Mary's eyes, wide, fever-glazed, unfocused. She blinks at you but doesn't really see you. Her lips are cracked, her hands trembling in her lap. She tries to say something, but the words crumble into coughs. Agnes looks up, and for the first time since you've known her, you see panic. Not loud, not wild, but cold and deep, like water creeping under a locked door. "Go," she says. "Get Platt." You don't ask questions. Mrs. Platt is already awake, of course. You find her outside, feeding crusts to a trio of mangy pigeons like their parishioners. The second she sees your face, she drops the bread and grabs her bag. "She got the rattle?" she asks. You nod. She doesn't speak again until you're both back inside, kneeling beside Mary, who's now shivering despite the fire being stoked hot and high. Platt lays a hand on her forehead, frowns, checks her throat, lifts her eyelids. "Could be fever," she mutters. "Could be bronchitis. Could be worse." You know what she's really thinking, everyone does. Agnes whispers, "Please, not consumption." That word lands hard, heavier than any plague, any famine, any fire. Consumption, the wasting disease, the slow thief, the ghost with red breath. Mrs. Platt doesn't answer. She opens a small vial and coaxes a few drops between Mary's lips. Mary swallows with difficulty, her face twisted in discomfort. Platt turns to Agnes. "Keep her warm. Lots of broth. No damp." Agnes lets out a bitter laugh. "You see this place?" Platt says nothing. She knows better. Here's your eerie little historical truth. In Victorian Manchester, tuberculosis, consumption, was everywhere. It didn't discriminate like cholera or typhus. Rich, poor, young, old, anyone could be taken. But in the slums it spread like wind through dry grass. Poor ventilation, damp walls, shared beds, bad air. These places were made for it. Some called it the romantic disease, because of the pale cheeks and tragic deaths of poets and artists. But there's nothing romantic about coughing up blood in a room that smells of mould. Agnes sits with Mary all day, wiping her forehead, holding her hand, humming old lullabies you didn't know she remembered. You and Nellie handle the fire, the food, the buckets. It's a strange quiet, the whole house holding its breath, waiting for a fever to break or climb. By evening, the cough deepens. There's a trace of blood on the rag. Agnes doesn't say anything, just presses it tighter in her fist. You step out for air and find the court unusually silent. Even the usual evening songs from the gin house are muted. Word travels fast when someone's ill. Neighbours avoid eye contact, not out of cruelty but caution. Illness makes everyone twitchy. One sick girl can turn into a whole street of graves. Back inside, Nellie asks, "Is she dying?" Agnes doesn't lie. "I don't know." That night, you take turns watching Mary. She sweats, shivers, gasps. She mutters things in her sleep, words half-formed, names you don't recognise. Once, she calls out for Sam. Agnes's mouth tightens, but she doesn't cry. Mrs. Platt returns before dawn with a bit of meat broth and something wrapped in cloth. Lavender, she says, might calm her, might not. You ask what else can be done. She shrugs. If she's strong, she'll fight it. If not, she doesn't finish. Here's the scholarly debate. Was Victorian medicine more help or harm to the poor? Some historians say the era marked real progress. Vaccines, antiseptics, anaesthesia. Others argue those advances were for the wealthy, the hospitals, the journals. The slums got snake oil and superstition. If you were lucky, you got a midwife with sharp instincts and a clean cloth. If not, you got dosed with turpentine and left to die quietly. Mary makes it through the night. Barely. The fever doesn't break, but it doesn't get worse either. She sleeps in snatches. Agnes never leaves her side. Her own skin is grey with exhaustion, her shawl damp with Mary's sweat. Nellie drifts in and out of sleep, clutching her rag doll like it holds answers. You do what you can. Stoke the fire, fetch water, swat flies, sit and wait. The city goes on outside. Men curse at carts. Women haggle over potatoes. The chimneys belch like nothing's wrong. But in this room, the world has shrunk to one face, one girl, one breath at a time. That night, for the first time in days, Mary opens her eyes and really sees you. She whispers, "I'm cold." Agnes presses a kiss to her forehead. "You're alive." It's not victory, but it's something. Mary sleeps. Not the restless, fever-churned sleep of the past days, but real rest. Still, steady. Her chest rising and falling like it's finally remembered the rhythm of staying alive. You sit across the room, watching her. Not because she needs you to, but because after everything you're not ready to look away. Agnes dozes beside her in the chair, one hand still tangled with Mary's. The lines on her face have deepened in just a week. Her hair's come loose from its pin. She looks like someone who's aged a decade in a handful of nights and isn't sure she minds. The fire's gone out again. You don't bother stoking it. The air is cold, but tolerable. The kind of cold that bites only a little, like a warning tap instead of a punch. It's morning now, though the sky hasn't changed its mind about being grey. Outside, life is rolling forward in its usual gritty clatter. Men coughing into fists as they shoulder sacks, the distant grind of a tram wheel, chimneys already groaning with the weight of Monday, but inside, for the first time in days, the room feels still. Eventually Mary stirs. She opens her eyes, blinks at the ceiling, then shifts her gaze toward you. "Did I miss anything?" she croaks, and the sound of her voice, rough but clear, makes you smile in spite of yourself. You don't know what to say, everything and nothing. Agnes stirs awake, and for a moment the three of you just sit there, breathing together, letting silence wrap around your limbs like a warm shawl. Nellie peeks her head out from under a heap of blankets, sees Mary sitting up, and lets out a high, relieved squeal that shakes dust from the ceiling. There's no great celebration, no parade, just porridge, quietly made. Mary gets the first bowl, though it's mostly water with a whisper of oats. She eats slowly, carefully, holding the spoon like it's made of glass. No one speaks. You just listen to the clink of metal against tin and feel something shifting back into place. Later that day, people begin drifting by. Spider stops in, looking bashful, carrying a single bruised apple. "Found it," he says. "Didn't nick it." Promise Mary takes it like he's handed her the crown jewels. Mrs. Platt returns with more broth and a slice of bread that's only slightly mouldy. She pats Mary's cheek gently. "You're stubborn. That's good." Then she turns to Agnes and adds, "You, on the other hand, need a bath and a proper night's sleep." Agnes snorts. "Not in that order." Even Fielding returns, the observer with his ever-present notebook. He stands awkwardly in the doorway, cap in hand, eyes softer than usual. "I heard," he says. "Glad she pulled through." Agnes nods, wary. He hesitates. "May I?" Agnes shrugs. Fielding steps inside, kneels by Mary's bed, and instead of writing anything, pulls out a little book from his coat. "Poems," he says. "By Blake. Don't know if you read." Mary smiles faintly. "I can try." He leaves it with her, and just like that, he's gone. Outside, the neighbourhood is still frayed at the edges. The ruins of the fire-blackened lodging-house remain, charred timbers like ribs sticking out of the ground. A few children are poking at the ashes with sticks. One finds a melted spoon and holds it up like treasure. No one stops them. The rain hasn't returned, but the damp lingers. Puddles glitter with coal dust. The air smells like wet stone and stale hope. You spend the afternoon wandering the slum one last time. You see Alf again, coughing by the water pump, his blanket wrapped around his shoulders like a shroud. "She's better then," he rasps. "She is," he nods, doesn't say more, just sits down slowly and stares at the mud. Near the market you spot Bess, still scrubbing laundry, sleeves rolled high, hands cracked and raw. She doesn't look up, but she hums a tune you recognise, something Mary used to sing when she thought no one was listening. Even Cricket appears for a moment, leaning against a wall like she's been there all day. "Heard the girl's alive," she says, picking at a scab on her knee. "Told you walls can be kind." She gives you a wink, then hops off into the fog. You end the day back in the same room, same cracked floorboards, same soot-stained walls. But something feels lighter. Maybe it's Mary's breathing. Maybe it's Agnes laughing softly at Nellie's failed attempt to comb her hair. Maybe it's just relief. Mary reads to herself from the Blake book, slow and halting but determined. She stumbles over the words but doesn't stop. "And we are put on earth a little space, that we may learn to bear the beams of love." She looks up. "That's nice." You nod. "It is." Here's your final scholarly nugget. Debates still rage over whether the slums of Victorian Manchester broke people or forged them. Some historians argue that the suffering crushed generations, that the poverty was so deep, so systemic, that escape was nearly impossible. Others claim the communities within those broken bricks taught resilience, connection, and resistance, that they were crucibles, not graves. Maybe they were both. As the night settles in, you feel the hush return. Not the silence of despair, but of peace, of hard-fought calm. The fire is low, but enough. The rain stays away. Mary drifts off to sleep, her hand still curled around the little book. Agnes lies back in her chair, arms crossed, eyes closed. Not sleeping, just breathing. Nellie murmurs something in her sleep about dolls and jam. You lie down, pull your coat around your shoulders, and let the quiet hold you. You'll remember this place, not for its filth or sorrow, but for its stubbornness, its scraped-together joy, its people who survived not because of the city, but in spite of it. The slums never gave gifts, but every once in a while they let someone live. The city sleeps for now. Not deeply, Manchester never truly rests, but with a gentler rhythm tonight. The soot still lingers in the air, sure, and the drains still gurgle like they're trying to speak, but there's something softer about the quiet. No shouting from the alley, no coughing fits from down the hall, no unexpected hammering from the roofless place 3 doors down. You lie still, warmed by the fire's glow, the sound of Mary's soft breathing beside you. The air is cool, but not cruel. Somewhere nearby, Nellie stirs and mutters something about buttered toast, impossibly rich for a dream in this part of town. Outside, a street lamp flickers, guttering like it's trying to decide whether to keep burning. A dog howls faintly from a few blocks away, more out of habit than hunger. And high above it all, the chimneys of Manchester exhale their last tired sighs of the night, soot trailing into a sky too dark to notice. You've seen the worst here. Poverty sharp as nails, rooms that drown in rain, lives that vanish without a whisper. But you've also seen the small rebellions that carry people forward. A loaf shared, a song hummed, a girl who lived. Tomorrow the mills will shriek again, and the carts will roll, and the air will be thick with grit and ambition. But for now, just for now, it's still. So close your eyes. Let the ache in your bones settle. Let the dirt of the day wash off in your dreams. There's no danger here, not tonight. Just the hush of a world catching its breath, and the sound of survival folding itself into sleep.